Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Stephen, be good and don't open up to anyone but mom and dad. Giving her son final instructions, Camille was spinning in front of the mirror in the hallway. Mommy, don't go, quietly asked the little one and pulled my skirt, attracting attention. We'll be back soon. Well, we will bring guests, said Christopher, son, and sitting down next to him, put his huge palms on his shoulders. Encouraging squeezed. You're growing up to be a man, so act like one. Sit and watch cartoons. Don't be afraid of anything. Well, enough with him. We're already late. Irritably threw the young woman, adding she lips, fracture, poison, lipstick, and for some reason it was madly annoying how patiently sometimes her husband began to talk to the baby. Christopher was 23 years older than his wife. They married in a hurry, thereby giving many friends and acquaintances a reason to joke that someone had time to jump in the last carriage, so as not to remain in his old age bachelor, who favorably arranged his lost life without a native. In general, Camille was greeted coolly in Christopher's entourage. What was to blame? It was her origins, but also temperament and habits and attitudes were all gone. And while he waved his hand, Camille, and smiled as her son repeated the gesture. The door closed, the key turned in the lock, and Stephen was left alone. Outside the window it was slowly getting dusk. The three-room apartment, whose windows overlooked the courtyard, closed on all sides by other houses, was gradually filling with walls, and in some places with darkness. The kid did not like the latter and was very afraid of it. But now he could be brave. For in every room there was a light left for him. Stephen still stood for a little while, vaguely hoping that his parents would change their minds and come back, but then reconciled slowly. Protopopov a large room, which served as both a living room and a nursery. He climbed onto the sofa and took the TV remote, pressed a button and the screen lighted up, showing something funny and cartoon, and put on the right channel at all before the boy was already at home. But the day we only for a couple of minutes, while mom literally took out the trash. And so Camille, as a housewife on the full provision of her husband, could afford not to give the child to kindergarten. It wasn't even possible. 6-year-old Stephen was panic-stricken by everything unfamiliar. It was difficult to make contact with others, and even more so with adults. He shunned any fuss and moving games, in general, any violations of his usual cozy routine. He was taken to a psychologist, but he found it all age-related. This happens, and it is better to just wait it out. The baby's development is generally progressing as it should. Christopher and Camille could theoretically ask one of the neighbors to look after their son, but decided it was not necessary. They're fussy and worried about themselves. The thing is that they were suddenly invited to visit distant relatives who had just returned from the capital, where they had their own business. In general, these people arranged a large gathering of people wanting to restore blood ties, to return to their roots. Finally, when so much time and effort had been put into making things happen, Christopher hoped that they would help him get a proper job. Not in the capital, of course, but there would be the right connections. For more than 30 years he had worked as a bricklayer, but recently the construction firm where he worked went bankrupt, and it was not easy to find a new place at his age. Camille is just passionate. How she wanted to sit at home, wiping her son's nose, as she herself put it frankly. I could live like that, Camille dreamed. She was going to be 32 in a year. What had she accomplished? Sometimes she cried quietly into her pillow, and her husband and her nettles night after night without hearing. Camille and her sisters were born in the village to a family, as they said, a lost one. The parents drank. The daughters grew like weeds. When the eldest Camille was 12, they died, despite being taken in by an aunt. Camille had to become a mother to the 4-year-old Emily, and also work in the house and in the vegetable garden. The aunt immediately put her sisters in their place, saying that she would not tolerate freeloaders. Naturally, any higher education was out of the question. Only work at the house from 14 until graduation as a saleswoman in a store on weekends, and then full-time. And naturally, all the wages were taken away by her aunt. Camille met her future husband 11 years ago when he came in to buy mineral water and apples. Christopher came to visit acquaintances and also to improve his health in nature. The doctor insisted that if he didn't take care of his vessels properly, he could have a stroke before retirement. They just exchanged a few words. He replied that they were local city folk. Somehow the conversation got going. Christopher told him he'd been divorced a long time ago, so single, alone in his apartment. Camille realized that the absorbent cotton was her chance. They saw each other again and again. The man was touched by the girl's selflessness, her care for her younger sister. He fell in love. He did not delay with the proposal to legalize the relationship in a large apartment, which Christopher's parents still received. There was room for his wife's younger sister. Emily gave him a fatherly feeling. He hoped that the girl could go to university. But Emily's coming of age was barely celebrated. She left home. That's probably all Camille said about her, with her lips pressed together. Christopher was shocked. He'd never offended a girl in any way. It was disconcerting, of course, how the sisters sometimes quarreled violently. And the occasions were petty. But is that a reason to leave home? To live first with some shady acquaintances, and then, I dread to think, to get a job as a dancer in a nightclub. Christopher talks about a truce and assures Emily that he won't let her get hurt. The girl, who became after leaving an independent voyage of an unknown spectacular beauty, said that she simply cannot leave her nephew for his sake, will come to visit and carried fruit kilograms. In winter she gave him toys, helped him dress for last fall, and generously helped with money. Although Christopher assured that they coped because he was proud and it was shameful to accept material help from a girl, preparing to be a daughter, and even earning in this way. Time went by. Stephen watched cartoons, then ate some cookies left for him in the kitchen, and drank some iced tea. The little boy thought that it was not so scary to be alone. But then suddenly the light in the apartment suddenly went out, swallowed him. Darkness dissipated only by a ghostly light from the window. As always it piles up, drag, no wiggle, creeping quietly, thump, snore. The baby was twisting his head and breathing frequently. I wanted to scream, to cry. But it was frightening that if at least there was no sand, those lurking in the dark would rush to him. Mom called softly, listened. Daddy listened again. Somewhere in the bathroom, the pipes slammed. It had happened before, but it sounded different now. Stephen had no doubt that those scary monsters, but already ready to play cat and mouse with him. The kid carefully lowered his legs to the couch, pulled the warm plaid and covered himself with it, leaving it hanging like a cloak. And then what sometimes happens by accident happened. A thing just fell. My mother had put some box on the edge of the shelf, and it, losing its balance, fell. Stephen at that moment was looking out the window. How nice it was. Lots and lots of lights on. That would be to sneak away, so as not to be caught by those who live in the dark, and this noise from the corridor was the last straw for the nerves of the kid. He climbed up on the table, then stood on the table by the window, pulled the handle with all his might. The sashes fell off and the coolness of the October evening poured into the room. The noise of cars started along the road hidden by the houses, and the main thing now was the chase. Saw lights, lanterns, windows of apartments. Stephen had never been so close to Oban Heights in his life, and it made a strange impression on him. There was something mysterious about the freshly opened expanse of twinkling lights, as if you were opening the first page of a picture book. Anticipating, but not knowing exactly what awaited next, the little boy suddenly realized that here from the very windowsill, he was not the least bit afraid of what awaited him in the darkness of the apartment. He sat on the windowsill with his legs out and looked out into the yard, where everything seemed so small. Funny, it was like that for about 5 minutes. The little boy was not distinguished by obedience, even with his parents, but an unfamiliar voice somehow made him do it. Croa froze, staring with wide-open eyes in front of him. "Calm down. Everything will be all right." The window of the room where Stephen was sitting was close to the balcony of the neighboring apartment where the man had just stepped out. His purpose was prosaically to look out into the distance, to breathe the air where it felt like the onset of real winter, to think about his own thoughts. The blackout didn't bother him. By the way, he lit a battery-operated lamp, and then he noticed the baby. It was a short distance from the balcony, so he could reach it. "What's your name?" "My name is John. I'm your neighbor." Stephen answered the boy. "What are you doing here?" "You sit quietly in there, dark and scary. And I'm not coming out of there. It's better, all right. You're not scared. You're calm. You look at me, and it's okay. I'm going to take you in my arms now." "Okay. Why?" "Because you can't sit here, and you can't go in the dark. Right? Aha. Aren't you scared? You didn't move. Look at me, all right." That's when Evelyn and Grandma came back from their walk. The former was an old lady who cared about everything that went on in her yard and her house, and the other one was her terrier dog, and happened to be in the habit of gazing around the house from bottom to top. Evelyn noticed a child in the dark window opening. The old woman gasped, and then screamed in terror. Stephen heard the screams as he fell out of the cozy poo trance that the voice had plunged him into. Suddenly, he realized that there was emptiness below and darkness behind, and he became very frightened. The boy roared and kicked himself, but nothing irreparable happened. The man managed to bend over the balcony and grab the child. And in a moment, he was finally really out of danger from the 9th floor. "You're not crying?" He looked into the baby's eyes. John and Stephen nodded. Sobs. "One last time. Let's go inside." Opened the door from the balcony and entered his apartment. Put the boy in the big padded chair and sat down next to him, so that his eyes were level with the child. "So first of all, where are your mom and dad?" "Gone." "Did they leave you home alone with the window open?" "Alone. But I opened it myself." "Why would you do that?" "The light's off. It's dark. It's scary. Lights in the window. Flashlights. But the light will come back. That's what to do with your parents. They'd been gone a long time." "Aha. But do you want some water or juice or milk?" "Juice." "Do you have an apple?" Stephen smiled. The apartment John rented was very ordinary, and he did not change anything in it. The modest furnishings had not been renovated for a long time, but in general it was clean and decent. And this young man had recently arrived in the city and could have rented any apartment, but he chose this one because he was lucky, and the apartment was in the building where the right person lived, the person he had long ago sworn to find. Evelyn, who witnessed what had happened, was shocked. Such an event can be discussed for a long time from all sides, and the main thing was that she was the only one who had witnessed it, so she hurried to share it with her best friend, stopping by for a cup of tea. So wait, after listening to the story a second time, because Evelyn loved to repeat herself, she was enlightened by the details of the event. Jenna decided to clarify something. "So what happened in our house? Why didn't you say something before?" "I told you. You should have listened." The old woman was insulted, unwilling to admit the truth. At first, she really did not say where the child was sitting on the window. She was just emotionally functioning with impressions. The baby. That man was taken away by a stranger, and we're sitting here like a fool, drinking tea. So he's not exactly a stranger. He's a neighbor, a decent, well-mannered young man. "Do you know who she is?" "Well, polite," Evelyn said, as if that would be the end of it. "Holds the door. Woman doesn't smoke. Probably a student or a businessman you talk to, and you'll know everything. So let's go to him. What a stranger's kid. He saved me. Well, it's only the parents that get Andy back now." Meanwhile, Camille and Christopher were on their way home. The visit was a little disappointing. It turned out that no job could be offered to Christopher. They promised he would. Maybe where such valuable personnel is needed, but it was clear they'd just feed him breakfast. Camille's mood was spoiled by something else. In the guest was a young married couple, peers in the RKK, taking between them and shining love Camille. It was physically unpleasant to look at them. It emphasized the fact that she herself had married purely out of convenience. But how was married life? Robert asked. He was an old friend of Christopher's. Back in high school, they had agreed that they both couldn't stand algebra and had a passion for Dumas. Slowly, what if we really mean it? Look, we've known each other for 100 years. You don't think I can tell? I'm fine, really. Your son's growing up. He looked at Camille, who was helping the lady of the house put the salads on the table. When I saw her, I fell in love with her. Would you believe it? No, I didn't think so. Just looking at me with that age difference. I get it. I added a frown. It was hard to get it out of myself that she got married because I could offer to provide a proper home. And I don't believe it. She's young. Yes, you see everything so beautifully when you're young. Remember when we went to Sicily in 2000? What vineyards of sausage there? And the women. If only we had stayed. Timo shook his head. It was a completely different world. Shook his head Christopher. He who's that distant, seemingly already almost historical past imprinted in his memory not only sultry moment pictures, Mediterranean pastoral. Then he and Robert dashingly rushed to earn money abroad. However, as many believe that already their dreams will come true. And even at first fortune smiled on Robert's specialty. Got him a job at a factory making olive oil. To adjust the work of updated equipment, Christopher was invited to repair masonry wine cellars belonging to a sick man. And as they told the head of the mafia, the one turned out to be not a pathos bloodsucker, but as if a normal man. Salaries he did not delay and even invited to make a table with him, which is forever remembered Christopher. Great cheeses were served. Giovanni Bianchi amazed Christopher with his knowledge of Russian, and told that he learned it for the sake of his first love, beautiful Elizabeth, who was the daughter of the director of a large department store. But the author of the trip with his father met his bursting love, forced the beautiful girl to renounce her own family and enter the house of the groom, trusting him completely. The lavish wedding was played. But on the happiest day, when Giovanni had a son and his beloved died, Christopher also told about his family. His father and grandfather were professors. They were involved in psychology and psychiatry, studying controversial topics such as hypnosis, personality programming on a subconscious level. Christopher disappointed them by refusing to continue the family business. He wanted to work with his hands to create something reliable for centuries, so he chose the craft of masonry. Christopher plunged into memories and does not come out of their public hour, but in some places prickly disturbing fog for a long time, even when we had already said goodbye to everyone and moved back with his wife. Let's go to the zoo as a family, unexpectedly suggested Christopher as we approached the house. It's been a long time since we've been out together. We'll eat ice cream and tease the monkeys. Camille was silent because she pushed with her tongue. Christopher realized that his wife was in a bad mood. It's interesting how the tycoon must have watched cartoons for a year. Again, the man tried to diffuse the atmosphere and looked up. The lights had already been fixed, the windows in the apartment were glowing, and the window was open. Camille exhaled, holding his wife's hand in his. The woman also looked up, startled, forgot how to breathe, and his gaze fell down to the asphalt. The windows are empty, son. They rushed together to the entrance, but almost in the face did not hit the door, from which came out 100, nodding sticks among themselves old ladies. Which ones came back? Then the parents, I lowered myself on them, Evelyn Blood, and turned away, miming with my lips. There's nothing wrong with your child. Hurriedly calmed, sick, and kind of ready to faint parents. Saved. What? What happened? Camille whispered. Where's my son? He bellowed. The old ladies looked at each other. At your neighbor's. He took him off the window. He took him off the window. Did you hear what happened? You interrupted Evelyn. I was walking home to the store. In the morning I noticed that the kefir was expiring. so it would be evaluated. And what do you think? They took the kefir. I had to take it. I need it for my stomach. Oh, you chased Jenna away, realizing the retreat could go on for a very long time. In general, your son neighbor to the right on the balcony went out and saw ours that sits on the windowsill. So he took it down to his place, took it away. Just like that. Christopher silently rushed forward. Camille rushed after him, rather after her son. There you go and thank you nothing, waved her hands Jenna. The door knocked and rang at the same time. John some time ago and the boy puzzle multicolored cube went to open. You had my son, it felt like my heart was going to jump out of my chest. Which son raised his eyebrows questioningly, not letting him pass the threshold. Stephen, the little boy. Camille's voice trembled. We were told that you saved him. What do you mean? Yes, he stepped back, letting him pass and pointing with his hand into the room. The parents rushed to the child. Stephen was terribly happy to see them, but didn't understand why. Why Mom is crying, and Dad is not crying, but mumbling something affectionately. I don't know how to thank them. When the first emotion subsided, Christopher turned to John. Thank you. We were told how it was from the street. From the street, a neighbor saw Camille pick up. Thank you. Don't mention it. John brushed it off. What could have been done differently? It's just that I went out on the balcony for a minute and saw a boy sitting on the windowsill. That will never happen again. John smiled at the head of Stephen's arms. Thank you again. And what's your name? John. Thank you. You're a neighborly visitor. We haven't seen you before. I just moved in. Renting. There were more thank yous. Finally, we went into the hallway. A toy. It was Stephen's father's deadline. What toy? Didn't get it. While the boy was here, I let him play, smiled John, holding out a cube. If you don't mind, I can give it to him. I used to play it myself. No, I don't mind, Christopher replied, and thought they were awfully lucky to have a neighbor. When the door closed behind the family, John sighed as he finally had a chance to be himself again. Back in the room, he sat on the floor in the lotus position and began to breathe in a measured manner. He needed to regain his equilibrium and energy balance, because today he saw up close the man he had been searching for so long. This man had changed so much, but the eyes he would never forget. If it wasn't for years of training and discipline, he would have barely looked into them and screamed again, returned to the nightmare he had only miraculously survived, would have gotten lost in the madness. John held his breath. As far as he had the strength, and exhaled sharply, as if gluing himself firmly together from the shards that had once shattered this man's entire being. But now, coincidentally, he was one step closer to realizing his plan. How fortunate that the boy had climbed up to the window. Now it would be much easier for him to enter this family the next morning. Camille woke up in a disgusted mood. First of all, she remembered that she had left the child alone, and she felt ashamed. And that was not the kind of person Camille liked to be. Secondly, she knew that the airbag was slowly melting away. And my husband hasn't gotten a job yet. So what to do? They don't starve. Enough at the aunt's place. She's had enough. Of course, there was an option to ask Emily, but my little sister will start lecturing about child rearing, so she'd understand. But I had to go to the store. There for a long time wandered between the shelves, because I forgot the shopping list made the day before yesterday. Good afternoon. A familiar voice sounded, but it seemed even more beautiful today. It was John, too, with a cart, where Camille had a quick eye for fresh pigeon tenderloin, a huge piece of cheese and chocolate. And I felt ashamed of myself. And I felt a little ashamed of myself. With a stocked pasta and soup set of chicken and potatoes, a pack of cheap yogurt for my son. Hello, replied, shifting her gaze to the guy. I wonder how old he is. Even younger than me, pricked the thought, and Camille smiled at the girl and said she had a charming smile. And why did the woman think I got Christopher not like this tall, muscular, with piercing and green eyes, correct facial features, sensual lips? One more look at the hand, no ring. Somebody's lucky to have a son. Poor thing was so frightened, wasn't he? I wondered. Yeah, he's fine, she shrugged. I think he'll quickly forget the bad things. Next to such a wonderful mom, John smiled. But Camille thought that if she were an ice cream maker, she would definitely have Rustic's class lying down. I really feel so bad about leaving him alone. You see, we were called to visit with a baby to go uncomfortable, and there is no one to watch. John nodded, put a set of cakes in the cart. I understand. I was raised by my father alone, and I was often alone. He believed it could raise me to be a man. He seems to have succeeded, Camille replied thoughtfully, noting that John was dressed expensively. Perhaps the watch is not a fake. I wonder what a man is. Forgotten in the apartment, which was difficult to publish because of its deplorable condition. We approached the cash register, and the cashier punched Camille's goods. That'll be $450. The woman put her card to the terminal. It doesn't go through, the cashier said, and added, in a horribly inappropriate way, insufficient funds. Camille at that moment understood very well the meaning of the expression, shame makes you want to fall through the ground. Sorry, wrong card, I guess. Burked nervously from the bag, where there was no other card. The cash was left at home. You'll be there soon. There are people waiting here. Some man in the back of the line was indignant. John held out his hand and put his card to the terminal. Oh, come on. Camille pulled her eyes out. Thank you for your purchase. We look forward to seeing you again. The cashier glanced at John, already punching in his purchases, and then at Camille. She felt like she'd told them the same thing for nothing. Only I'm so embarrassed, and I'll just return the cash I forgot at home, she blushed. So hot her cheeks were. Camille walked out of the store with John. Would I be uncomfortable taking money from a woman for helping out of the goodness of my heart? He grinned, his eyes downcast. The license doesn't cost a trifle. Isn't that heavy? The 4-pound bag of pasta was indeed pulling unpleasantly down. Camille took it just because it was a good discount. They'd be enough for a couple of months. I guess we were just lucky to meet, said as we walked down the little alley. K, which, illuminated by my meager fall sun, shone red leaves like flaps of silk. Every year, for some reason, these trees were the ones that shed their leaves later in the year. How long will you be staying with us? I mean, we didn't think anyone would ever rent that apartment. It's just that there are some old memories of this town and this street. But the present is often so different from what you expect in the past. I think I'll stay here for a couple months, and then go home. Where, pardon me, I'm probably minding my own business. Why is that? It's always good to talk to someone nice. For now, my home is in Austria. But who knows? We walked on in silence. We parted on a landing. Say hello to your son. He's brave and smart beyond his years, John said. Goodbye. Once again, Camille blushed. If it had happened to someone else, she would have shrugged. But it was different with her. Camille was surprised at how John was. The little sister came back and was walking home. Her little sister came upon her. Christopher told me everything. How can you be so irresponsible? Emily waved her hands. Camille rolled her eyes, not hiding how fed up she was with her sister. In fact, at a tender age, she'd adored Emily. Left her tidbits, covered her with the warmest blanket. She used to weed her aunt's vicious garden bed. But later Camille realized that Emily was annoying because she was too free-spirited. By the fact that she had been fed all these years. And she says, how does a princess leave home? Dancing and earning enough to rent an apartment, dressing fancy. But it ended well. Camille tried to fight back by developing purely by accident. I hope you learned your lesson. And look at you. The woman couldn't stand it. For several minutes, the sisters silently glared at each other. Camille gave in first, sighed, and smiled shyly. I'm sorry. I was just worried. Yes, it's awful that it happened that way. We'll change the bolts on the windows. We'll figure something else out. And until Stephen's old enough to make sense, we'll never leave him alone again. So we'll make up, said Emily, who just couldn't stay angry with her sister for long. And the next days went even as if better than expected. But then something happened. One evening, Camille and Christopher left the house again, but this time leaving their son with Emily. Those same relatives agreed to help with the work. And Camille accompanied Christopher as moral support. We also talked to Sam, an acquaintance of theirs in this town. He owned a firm, building cottages, houses. In general, everything in vacancies Mason as if it was free. They came back, buoyed with hope. In a couple of days, Christopher could go on a trial order. True, he had to spend a couple of days out of town in a cottage village. But that was a small thing. We let the bus go again, because some drunken guy came asking for more bread. So we had to walk the rest of the way. Nothing. The new housing estate will be built, and we will have more transportation. Christopher encouraged his wife. Camille was not impressed by the prospects and continued to look around fearfully. It was unpleasant for her to walk an extra stop in bad weather through the park, then past some unfinished tour. And then out of a doorless doorway shining with an alarmingly otherworldly darkness came two types, one of them spitting through his teeth. Walking, added the second, and grinned. And the third type appeared was behind the backs of the spouse, blocked the way to retreat. "You, Christopher," screamed frightened Camille, clinging to her husband. "Excuse us, let us pass. Where are we going?" The first man stepped closer. "We don't know each other." Christopher spoke firmly, but apparently not at all convincingly. "Not for the likes of these guys. Let me through. Otherwise, what am I, Grandpa?" The second man repented and jokingly, but palpably poked Christopher with a fist in the shoulder. "Do you have a problem?" A familiar voice sounded. Camille did not know she could feel such joy. Turning sharply, she saw John under the light of the only street lamp. He seemed to radiate calmness, the calmness of a tiger, capable of destroying any opponent with a single swing of his paw. "And who the hell are you?" Valerius bellowed, the type that stood closer to John, and ridiculously swung his fists and rushed forward. Camille come again with her husband, but hardly forgot about his existence. John literally threw him over himself, then hit the second attacker hard, and the third simply backed away. And then those who were defeated jumped up, and all just ran away. "Thank you." That's all Christopher could manage to get out of himself. And suddenly John staggered backwards and landed on a pole. "John!" Camille exclaimed, rushing toward him. "Are you hurt?" She touched his face lightly, and he lifted his chin, looked into his eyes. Camille felt as if she were falling into the sea, woven from the chaita and the charms of the marsh grass. "Just a scratch," answered, though the eyebrow above her eye was cut short. Apparently, this first one was proving to be a truly dangerous opponent, even for one such as John. "Yes, not so much," as bellowed at the confused spouse. "She's not well." "I'm fine, really, right? I'm not worth your concern." "Camille, I just have a headache, and I'm dizzy." "You may have a concussion," Christopher said, walked over so his neighbor could lean on him. "It'll have to be soon. I think it'll get better soon." "Have you been in a lot of fights like this before?" asked Christopher. Personally, he did not approve of forceful methods of solving issues in any case. My father's a lawyer. John didn't approve of it. But sometimes there are cases when you just cannot pass by. "Let's get this wound cleaned up," Camille gasped. "Put some tea down. Have a drink." Christopher was more than happy to hand over the neighbor to the doctors, because Camille was not even a nurse, but from what happened, his nervous patriarchy. That, however, rode off at age and did not argue. Without adventures, reached the apartment of the spouses. "Who is it? What happened?" Met a small company, dumbfounded Emily, our neighbor John, which Stephen saved by putting tea, please, food and first aid kit, curtly said everything she knows Camille needs. "Stephen is asleep, by the way," frowned Emily, and went to do as told. Sent first to the bathroom for a dressing down with Camille, and then planted in the kitchen filled with tea and clubs. John was speechless and visibly embarrassed by the attention to his own person. Emily was under the impression of how complicated life turns out to be. 2 miraculous rescues by one neighbor in 1 week, a world record. Perhaps this mysterious neighbor made a double impression on her. Yes, handsome, even too well-mannered intellectual, aged a generation, probably. But there was something about him she didn't like. And yet show with the doctor, said Camille. In farewell, when the neighbor went to his room only because you insist on it, smiled and again met gaze intently, deeply, to the most secret corners of your soul, sweet dreams. And it was surprising. But Camille slept beautifully. She was dreaming some sweet nonsense that young naive fools who don't know how unfair the real world is. But not a 30-year-old woman married without love. In this dream, Camille was riding Bigfoot, with a cotton candy dress on her arms and butterflies, with golden wings, singing that dreams can come true. Can you believe we were outside the toy department? Christopher, a couple days later, when he came back from the store he went to with Stephen. And he didn't beg for anything this time at all. He's getting older and realizing that he's done being naughty. If only Christopher had been a little more attentive and Camille hadn't been so immersed in sadness for tons of her everyday life. True, now deluding them with flashes of thoughts of the neighbor coming in as inconsequential. They would have noticed that Stephen had become less interested in all his toys at all, for he now had one and his most favorite, a puzzle cube given by his neighbor. On this day in the evening, John just showed up on their doorstep with a small basket containing exotic fruit, cheese, and chocolates, and said it was just a gesture of thanks for being a first aider. Naturally, he was invited to a tea party. Yay, Uncle John! Exuberantly rejoiced Stephen, jumping after his guest in the kitchen to play with me. Only if you obey your mother, smiled the neighbor. I promise, with the purest of intentions, replied Stephen. Of course you will play, sighed Camille, who was mortified by this picture. Christopher said nothing. It was strange to him. However, there was no time to deal with anxieties, and it turned out to be tedious. It was time to go to work. Christopher packed his things, kissed his wife, stroked his son's head warmly, and said goodbye to Emily, who promised to come and help more often. Well, now tell me what you had in common with him and your sister when your husband was already far away, and he himself was sweetly in his proper day's sleep. What do you mean? The piercing image always frightened Camille a little. And then years ago, she guessed her sister wasn't marrying for love. Well, he's a friend of ours. Shrugged her shoulders at the windowsill. Comes by sometimes. Stephen likes to play with him. That's all. What do you want? Taking less robbed, Camille began to humor the soil in the pot. He's a nice, seemingly poor man, but he's open. And then for some reason she took and laid out to her sister the incident in the store. Emily listened silently, only her eyes grew darker and darker. Fool, he shouted, so that Camille recoiled. She flew out into the hallway, hastily threw on a sheepskin coat, pulled on stiletto boots and rushed away. Immediately, however, there was an insistent knock at the neighboring door. "Hello," answered John, who opened the girl's door. He didn't like the way she looked at the stairs. He could read well, too well. Here Emily abruptly held out some bills to him. "What is this? Paying back a debt? You paid for my sister." "Thank you. Of course you don't have to." John smiled. It was. And that smile, that special smile, worked perfectly. But this maiden with the fury of a gazelle came to Leo. Only her eyes narrowed dangerously in response. "We don't need charity." Eve interrupted. "Will you take it? And if I don't?" Looks like there's a new player in the game. John didn't expect to have any problems with this girl, but he suddenly started to like it. "What do you want? What about you? Why are you meddling in our family?" The door next door is ajar. One of the neighbors was attracted by the loud voices, and I didn't want my sister to overhear anymore. Anything can happen. Come in, we'll talk over coffee. A good chin tuck and squeeze passed her into the apartment. Emily was determined. She wanted to find out from John if he had a woman, why he'd moved in at all, and if his relationship with her sister smelled of flirtation. Except that conversation didn't happen. John parried. He gave such a florid answer to any question that when you tried to understand it, it came out that she herself was a fool and spoke nonsense. But he did tell me something about working as an analyst. Always brought back nostalgia from his childhood. He was charming. He was outspoken. Emily spent 300 hours at his place, and when she came out, she couldn't breathe in the crisp, frosty air. Yeah, her head felt kind of heavy. It felt like she was slipping in a guide, and only now she was waking up. The girl squeezed her eyes shut and winced hard to the point of pain. This is crazy. She'd gone to see him, hadn't she? And how come she'd taken a liking to him? Why does it seem like he's definitely a nice guy, yet it felt so strangely soul-scraping, like something was being put down? But one thing was definitely worth recognizing. John has a stunningly beautiful voice that you want to listen to forever. Maybe that's what sirens would sound like if they were men. His voices are special not only because of the emerald-colored malachite, but because of how catchy they are. It's as if his every word is typed into his brain underneath them. Meanwhile, Christopher arrived at the cottage village of New Lynxes, where he found himself immediately immersed in the already forgotten processes. And then, behind the rumble of work, behind the unsuccessful creation of something that can please more than one generation, he was flooded with memories, and he willingly succumbed to them. So it was easier not to think about the fact that the beloved truth, the most beloved woman in the world to him, cooled, and supposedly an urgent case comes along and slips out of his hands. Camille became more thoughtful, and also went to the hairdressers for something, although before she was content to color her sisters from home. Which, by the way, is very good for the family budget. Lying on his bed one evening, Christopher was suffering from insomnia. It had happened to him before. And then a bell rang from the depths of his memory. What if I tried what had his father and grandfather taught him? Not that they were such masters at fighting insomnia, but there were special techniques for working with the mind. But then Christopher came to his senses and called himself crazy. These aren't toys. And in general, it was better to stay away from all this, as he realized once dearly. With that, Christopher fell asleep, and in his dream he saw shards of the past. Then he was still young, walking through the garden with Don Bianchi and listening to him. And the Italian was talking about his son being the only heir growing up. It's strange. The boy has nightmares and strange fantasies of running away from home. He believes he lives among some evil sorcerers. Naturally, Giovanni takes him to the doctors, but we don't want to expose the child to their method. Then we talked about Christopher's life, and he bragged that his hypnotist acquaintance even said that he supposedly had a talent. And that's when Giovanni asked Christopher for a delicate favor. He said he didn't want his problems and rumors to spread. The risk is great if he finds a master in such a specific matter in his environment. That's why he needs science, Christopher. And Giovanni also offered a reward so generous that Christopher didn't believe it at first. Much later at home, with this money, buying a car, a foreign car, the latest model, and trying to start a business, Christopher felt uncomfortable. It seemed to him that this money was not good dirty. And the last thing Christopher saw before waking up with a scream that made the other workers jump up in the room allotted to the crew was him. Giovanni led him over to the artificial grotto, where a beagle puppy was playing with a dog near a statue of Mars. "The boy is my son Alberto," Giovanni said. He looked to be about 6 years old, no more. The child was laughing, but how the laughter was cut short when he noticed his father grabbed the puppy by the collar and froze himself like a marble statue. His eyes were a huge green. Meanwhile, at the Christopher house, the changes continued. Camille thought about what she needed and, more importantly, could go out to work. The thing is that while walking with Starapova, she noticed that he did not shun other children. He himself approached the kids and asked to play. And to make sure they accepted him, he offered to share his brand new truck with them, transformed into a spaceship. Another time was in the country. They were in a bakery with Nika. Suddenly, Stephen said he was big and wanted to buy his own pie with jam. "Are you going to go to the salesman's aunt?" his mom asked him, taking some money out of her purse. Aha! After this incident, Camille wanted to cry. Is her son really becoming an ordinary kid? On this day, even with Emily on the wave of her maternal delight, she spoke calmly, without the usual barbs. Her sister, by the way, had a lot to share. After that incident with the return of money, she changed her attitude to John, and he no longer seemed so suspicious. She'd even stopped by to see him. Why? Camille finally saw her, because why did it suddenly become unbearable that John started spending time with Emily? No, he hadn't forgotten about her. She even asked him to fix a shelf in the kitchen. He did it, but still couldn't a sissy all posh and leave her alone. Better at your club. Look for a man, dumped, and through your teeth. What do you want? You're married. And then you've seen those men at the club. They only want one thing. So you like John? She turned sharply to her sister. She sang tensely. What the hell are you talking about? I'm talking. Emily shook her head. I don't like anything. It's just that my friends over there even went to the movies. Well, congratulations. Make sure you don't try to shade the pop roots. So we should go. I've got a husband to remember, and I'm gonna make cutlets for him to eat when he gets here, Camille said, and she left so fast that Stephen barely had time to run after his mom. True, took it as a game and was happy. Camille missed her husband, although until a couple of days ago, as if in secret from herself, as if dictated by her darker half, she had even rejoiced at his departure, because it was possible to shake freely. No, she could not say that Christopher was a domestic tyrant by any means. She couldn't even recall an instance where he'd made a single scene of jealousy. A husband was just too bland. But now his rustling was sorely missed in the house. Christopher moved loudly, and his yet infused all sorts of insignificant phrases with which the ordinary family life is filled like a bird's forest. That evening, Camille burned the cutlets, had to throw out a full pan. The doorbell sounded the annoying last straw, and the fact that it was a neighbor at the door made Camille look furious. Good evening. You're me. What's up? I thought you asked to come in. He looked confused. He was so innocent and defenseless now. You said the faucet was leaking. Yes, of course, come in with that technical nuisance. Camille could have handled it herself. It just needed a little tweak. But the day before Emily told her about the relationship, it turned out to be the perfect excuse to see John. 5 minutes worth of business. She smiled, ducking away from the screen. Are you in a hurry? Bah, not really. If you don't have time to deal with me, then just say so, and I'll beat you to it. I got the look of a delinquent puppy. Just what is it with my sister? With Emily? I don't know what you're talking about. Are you two dating? It was tactless and stupid for a married woman to approach that man. But Camille was carrying on. No, you're right. Emily, your sister, and I have to be completely honest. Yes, she's made it clear more than once that she cares for me. She's an amazing girl, smart, beautiful, generous. I get it. Spit. But I don't think it's gonna work out, because I am. Let's just drop the subject. Okay, the faucet's fixed. It was obvious the guy was in a hurry to leave, but Camille blocked the way, caught his gaze like a shooting star in the palm of her hand, and sank back into it. I can't be with her because I feel something more for another woman. But it's wrong, unacceptable, because she's unfree. She belongs to another. The quiet words fell in Camille's mind like river pebbles into the water that generates diverging circles. There are trusts that must be closed until you decide to open them all. Finished with a strange phrasing that Camille also missed. Well, I gotta go. I'll see you around. She woke up from a semblance of a trance when the door had already closed behind her neighbor. She went back into the kitchen and sat by the window. For a long time, she watched the light from the lanterns being lost in the deepening snowstorm. Winter came, fell unexpectedly on the city. And then she dropped her head on her folded hands and cried. I can't go on like this. Emily plumped down on a leather sofa in a relatively quiet to me for the rhythm of the glowing lights in the corner of the nightclub. One of the dancers pulled her neck, awkwardly doing the cobra dance, and I didn't have to replace her. Hello, an extra shift and a willingness to have a nervous breakdown that even a generous raise wouldn't compensate for. Problem? Asked Rick, sitting down. Here, this 19-year-old programming genius was a regular at the club, because here, as he said himself, a unique atmosphere in which, under the rhythms of Flash, you can qualitatively immerse yourself in work. But it was also here, and you'd find a client who needed something sweet done. Rick was known as a master of protection, valuable to his clients' files from websites from being hacked and stolen. But he was also said to be a hacker craftsman. But this guy himself is out of the blue and perpetually comradely, and has a toothpick between his lips. I deny all speculation. He said there are 1,001 legal ways to solve it. It's all about knowing where and what to look for. This one, raising his hand, Emily twirled it above his head. My whole problem is, why do I get sciatica by the time I'm 30? So go away, where do I get paid like this? And then I'm good at dancing, young Mila. So you use what nature has given you, smart girl. The main thing is not to waste it all. What about my family? What can I take from them? They're not so bad. They're normal. The girl took off her platform sandals and started kneading her feet. But my neighbor doesn't like that ex. He's kind of cloudy and sweet to me. You think he's a bad guy. I can't figure out why. Maybe the bad guy wants what's mine, unless he wants to squeeze me. But I don't think so. I mean, they're not lonely old people. They're people with a lot of acquaintances and stuff. No, it's something else. I just don't know who I'm talking to, but I'm not myself. It's like I'm overheating in the sun and my head's melting. You want me to find out about him? Can I? Are you awake? Emily stopped, shook her finger under Rick's nose without dragging me into her dark business. Just give me his picture and everything you know. I'll see what I can do. Since when do you moonlight as a private investigator? But I consider it a compliment for my muse to go away in a couple days. Christopher was pleased, so much so that he even started humming to himself from time to time. This internship not only came to an end, but also ended so successfully that the bosses immediately offered a new job, and even with good pay. There were, of course, some difficulties associated with it, but she decided that she talked to his wife, and together they will solve everything. Welcome back. Camille hugged him when he was back home. And where did you ask? In general, before with his son always ran out to meet him, and he did not step a step. Needed a lot of attention. He watches cartoons. Dad arrived. The kid came out into the hallway, looked at his father. Well, go to the grandmother. Came Christopher opens his arms for a hug game, which the son adored. Always Mishka will catch you, take you out of town, beyond the rivers. Stephen grimaced and roared loudly. Mommy chase uncle away. You're not my daddy. And he ran back into the room. Marveling, marveled Christopher. Son, Stephen, have you been gone long? He must have forgotten somehow. The little one still shook his head. Camille, he never did. Even when I went to my parents in the country for a month, he came back with a beard. It was last year, remember? He recognized it right away. What's wrong with him? But, fortunately, Stephen in an hour already recognized Papa was lured out from under the table guests, and the family reunited. As it should be. How are you doing without me? Fine. Oh, I don't mean that. Camille was embarrassed, but Christopher had already gotten gloomy. Waiting. Missed you, of course. I mean, we were good. This is where I redecorated a little bit. She pointed to the pendulum wall clock and the new tall. Don't get distracted, okay? We're on a tight budget. I've been offered a job, by the way. I'll only get paid at the end of the construction project. That'll be 4 months from now. I'd like to ask for an advance, of course. But who knows? Speaking of work, I can go out too. Stephen will go to kindergarten like a normal child. She interrupted her husband. And Camille told her husband about the wonderful changes in the baby. From strangers is no longer frightened, more inquisitive, became inquisitive, and just at home capricious stopped. Used to sit for hours and dive into his puzzle. This cube is colored, and silently fiddles with it. And you mean the one that the neighbor gave? Christopher frowned. Camille nodded. He came by. Well, the neighbor does. While you were away to fix some things around the house. But he likes to play with him anyway. You know what's annoying? Suddenly, Christopher slams a cup on a saucer, and it almost breaks. Stop it, you know. It's not normal. Stop it, you know. It's not normal. Said in syllables and loud enough for old gossipy Evelyn to hear on the first floor. A strange man comes into my house like he's my own. My son. My son, you see, has grown fond of playing with him. You see. Monitoring. I've had enough of this Brazilian soap opera. I'm not leaving here again. And you know what? That Camille was holding onto a stool. She's got her hand clutched in the city of her robe, as if its cozy softness could have anything to do with a pissed-off husband. I was offered a job with accommodation, 100+ kilometers away, but they'll pay well. People are reliable. They won't cheat. And here I think, I do not want to leave my wife and son alone. Not wanting them, all sorts of neighbors staggered. So you're coming with me. That's it. I call and say I agree about the family. I say the day after tomorrow, kids. But no kids for me. But you're my wife. I'm all yours. I brought you into the world. I've forgotten, so remember. He banged his fist on the table and left the kitchen. Camille froze. In all the years of their marriage, Christopher had never raised his voice to her. This was the first scandal that made her feel small, alone, and betrayed for nothing. Her husband's Camille didn't say anything. She simply silently cleared the table, put her son to bed, and ducked under the covers on the marital bed herself. Christopher read a little before going to bed and turned off the earpiece. Good night. He tossed dryly. Good night. Camille decided that he would never see her lightly again, because someone who suspects a wife who has given up everything in her life for the sake of her family like that is just not deserving. The next day, Camille calmly talked to Christopher, having learned all the details. It turned out that the spouse was entrusted to order the Mountain Lake Sanatorium, which was not an easy sanatorium, but a place where guests were offered health rest of elite class. Not so long ago, there finished the restoration of one of the parts of the building. And now, to give it an exquisite, fenced-in final look was lacking only good masons. In general, the immediate superiors of Christopher did not welcome employees traveling to the place of work with their families. But it turned out that the policy of the owners of Mountain Lake is such that the staff working there for long periods of time at will can settle with their families in small cottages, standing at some distance from the main building. And these were not cottages, not anything but decent houses, comfortable even for families with children. What am I going to do there? Camille grimaced. The same as being a housewife here. Personally, he put a lot of things into the term housewife, including the ability of a woman to keep quiet and obediently follow her husband, who makes important and, of course, correct decisions. There's also something that employees can use the pool, go skiing. There are mountains nearby. I see, Camille replied. And by the look on her face, Christopher, in turn, realized that she would probably comply. But she goes a great many ways to express her displeasure. You think about what you need to take on the road, and pack slowly. Genius idea, Camille, for rustling in the hallway dressed. I'll go to the store on the way. I'll think about it. Thank you, honey, for making up your mind for a stupid woman. What's the whole family gonna do? As Camille stepped out of the driveway, she tilted her head. The thick snow fell, lepiashi flakes, saddled on her face, secretly mingle with the tears flowing against her will. How much did she hate her husband at that moment? Would just take him and divorce him. Camille paused. If ever she knew a snowflake caught on her lips a bad rotten thought. Never had such a thing crossed her mind. Ask her who had before about it. She'd explain that she hadn't thought of it, because they had a family. Because in her youth, when it fell to her to take care of her younger sister, because she had no idea how it was even possible to exist, what she called autonomously outside of status. Christopher's wife. He was her pillar of support, the one who solved all her worries. Camille lived a quiet, peaceful life. Of course, sometimes she wanted more passion, something special, romantic, as in the movie show. Yes, and the income would not hurt, so as not to be happy about the points that came to the savings card supermarket basket of delicious and healthy food for the whole family. But she was used to that. There was reality, and there was that other thing, belonging to dreams, as if another Camille. The woman thought about everything and walked slowly, looking under her feet, scraping at the snow beneath her feet. Should I buy new boots? Camille thought. Well, let her be angry. Eva himself said he would make a good living, which means she has the right to go into a fake queue to feel better about herself through shopping. Oops, didn't notice when she ran into a passerby. Foot led, dented, taken in the road overnight to a treacherous crust of ice. And Camille snatched from behind this very passerby, clutched, and they collapsed together into a snowdrift. No mistake. Fences. Camille suddenly realized they were face to face, so that their noses were literally touching. It turned out to be John. He was the one who had been knocked down by a passerby and was now lying underneath her in the snow. I'm sorry, I'm fine. Oh, I'll be right back. Oh, what is it? John aggravation rose and pulled himself up, giving her a hand. The woman started to grow her down jacket. I'm so clumsy, and lost my hat, the neighbor added, handing over the snow-covered headdress. Sorry again, I'm not myself today. There are days when everything is wrong. There was once a rush to the store. It's not an emergency. Would you like to get dry and warm? Yeah, I gotta get home. I like Camille. We'd better have a cup of coffee. Let me make it up to you. I should have looked in front of me. He smiled charmingly. And it seemed to Camille that if she didn't agree to it now, she'd turn into a block of ice. In the cafe, they sat at a table with a view from the window. The receptionist's grandmother kindly pointed out a rack near the heaters where outerwear could be hung instead of a closet. Drinks were served, more pastries for her and a salad for him. More unexpected than ever, she asked about the one that Camille right now would be glad to forget. Let's just say getting serious amnesia. What do you mean? I'm probably being horrible, not tactful, but we haven't seen each other in almost a week. We just had a fight and broke up. There was nothing between us, and now there's nothing at all. Oh, I'm sorry, Camille said. But the news is a bit of a sunshine. I saw her yesterday too, and she brought some stuff, some leaf lettuce to grow on the windowsill for vitamins. She didn't say anything about you, but she looked fine. And we met, and our eyes met. He reached forward and covered her hand with his. What's bothering you? You can trust me. And Camille confided in him about her husband finding a job, how they had a fight, and how it didn't hurt. Apparently, I'm going to have to go away for a few months. Sometimes you have to resign yourself to fate, John said thoughtfully. Do you really think so? With the indignant hope of a negative answer. Camille asked, who knows? Sometimes you have to do what you want to do and just see where it takes you. As for your husband's decision, I wouldn't want to ruin the strong, loving loyalty of a family of mutual understanding, trust, and love. So I'm stepping aside, but I'm sticking around. After that, we talked some more on neutral topics and finally parted on the way home. Camille did go into the store and returned from the doorstep for the territory. The story that she was sold expired sausage, that's why while she was arguing, returned the goods, exchanged for fresh ones, wrote complaints. That's why she was delayed. Christopher was already packing and listened to his wife without much interest. He was not in the mood at all while talking to Camille, but he was sure that being away from the usual daily routine, and especially away from the neighbor, all this will definitely benefit her, and she will become his well-acquainted, Olenka, and affectionate, quiet and grateful for all he had done for her. Returning to his room, John stood under a hot shower for an hour, and then though the house and worked perfectly. The batteries. tried to warm up with chills, put on 2 sweaters over a warm house suit, turned out all the lights in the apartment. The guy left only the little dachshund on and climbed into a chair with his feet. Came up closer to the face of the little picture, so that the picture of the portrait of the little dog became clear and at the same time, as began to blur. That snapshot helped him pull himself together in the most difficult of times. He didn't think it would turn out this way. This was not what he had been preparing for over the years at all, and it was both frightening and infuriating at the same time. John couldn't afford to deviate from the plan, and at the same time he couldn't help but feel that he was making a terrible mistake. That this was all wrong, and even what this man had done, that it wasn't worth the punishment prepared for him, because it will affect not only the one who ruined his life a long time ago, but also innocent people. At the appointed time, the couple went to the train station. They decided to take the intercity bus, although Camille would have preferred to take the train. But Christopher said that the train was bad for his neck, and Camille pretended she didn't care. But she also thought about the fact that with such an age difference, and what awaits her in 10 or 15 years in the course of this war will be quite a grandfather. Mentally, he gave himself a kind of slap for such disrespectful thoughts to his spouse. Camille took her son by the hand, and they walked a little around the station, bought hot chocolate at a kiosk health, and Hibernation Fox. In it, they bought a bun and painted pigeons. What did the janitor with a broom scold them for? In general, before the departure of the bus had fun. In its warm interior, Camille just leaned back comfortably on the back of the seat and watched the city. All ideas are replaced by the outskirts, where more and more dominated by snow, bad weather. And soon she dozed off. In the sanatorium, Mountain Lake occupied decent territories, and if one climbed to the height of bird's flight, one would think that it was the work of giants playing. Had swept away with the palms of their hands a part of their military forest, but put a doll's house on the spot. And a little farther up the mountain Faith stretched threads and hung on them from a box of walnuts. That's how fragile, miniature from the height looked. Located at the ski slopes elevators for lazy and tired vacationers. "Mom, are you a palace?" asked Stephen, pointing with his pen at the huge sanatorium, which against the background of small one-story houses of the staff and really seemed like a palace. "Aha," Camille replied. She suddenly remembered that she and her husband had not been on vacation since the birth of their son. That carefree feeling of absolute relaxation. Now it seemed as wonderful and unattainable as the possibility of flying to Mars. And we're going to a ball there. Oh, don't talk nonsense. He wrinkled his nose, thinking that he would rather play the role of Cinderella here. It was a friend of her husband, could not humanly, trusting to leave in the city. Another woman with such a simple filly would have taken a chance long ago. She'd have had a lover, or even none, to make her happy, as long as she was young and good-looking. She thankfully kept herself in front of Christopher. And then, lo and behold, he began to bury her slowly. The woman's mood improved a little when she looked at the provided residence. It turned out that the cabin was freshly renovated. There were all the necessary household appliances. No frills, of course, but it was possible to live very well. On the day of arrival, we sorted things out, found out what and where. We also looked in the store working here for locals from staff to guests. And finally, we all had dinner together. And that's a sin. Relaxing. After the road, Camille thought that everything was not so bad, and she thought so until the next day, when together with Christopher, she went to the administration office of the sanatorium. Her husband wanted to clarify something about his work. As the appointed foreman, a solid and decisive person, she was just keeping him company, and at the same time decided to give herself a mini excursion, and suddenly on one of the paths flying what was to be in the spring and summer, an assortment of flower beds. They met John, and "What are you doing here?" without hello, and extremely rudely asked him Eve, breathing fresh air and marveling at the purity of the suburban snow, replied mockingly, raising an eyebrow. No, I'm serious. What are you doing here?" Relaxing. Are you? No, that's impossible. Are you stalking our family? Why? Interested. You tell me. Honey, don't. Camille tried to calm her husband down. Sorry, turned to her neighbor. We just didn't expect to see you here. My husband and my family came to work, and we're with our ponytail. Small world. John shrugged. Well, congratulations. This is a really great place. Why wouldn't you come here? See you later, said, and headed away shamelessly. But the impression he got was one of equanimity. Camille quickly settled into her new place, and she even liked it. Right above the kitchen sink was a window with a view of groves of blue spruce trees, so fiddling with dirty dishes passed under contemplation. The peacefulness of the landscape of the sun noticeably improved appetite, which was not surprising. With the child being able to spend much more time outdoors here than in the city, and the air was really clean, it seemed to have so much oxygen and forest flavor in it that it made you dizzy. True, sometimes my son would persistently start asking where Aunt John was. They were playing so well. Uncle John is funny. He can throw high in the air in his arms and catch it back. Camille answered that Uncle John stayed in town. He had business there. She knew that if she gave her son John's presents away, he would not leave her alone. And even her husband seemed to have calmed down. He immersed himself in his work as if he were younger. When he had a whole team of masons at his disposal, together with whom they gave over the new restaurant saloon, where, according to the owners of Mountain Lake, was to be a real hearth in the manner of the medieval, to roast meat on a spit right in front of the guests. In one of the clear evenings, when it seemed in the transparent sky spilled liquid amber along the horizon, Camille was strolling along the territory of the sanatorium, and suddenly, still from afar, noticed John turn to Flood hurriedly back. She lifted the hood of her down jacket, hoping that she would not notice or recognize him. Camille, having noticed, turned around, and in her gaze read a plea to leave. Please, Ostap. I refrain from the temptation to betray my husband. When I'm with you, the man was relentless. Are you avoiding me? No. Then why aren't we seeing each other? You said it was wrong. Isn't ordinary friendship forbidden? Is that enough for you? Am I? I exhaled a shuddering cloud of vapor and turned away to avoid looking into eyes that were as enchanting as forest lakes. It's enough for me, but we can at least try somehow. It's okay. We've made peace. And while Paradise, not without pleasure, took him under the arm and went together to the main out of the sanatorium building. And you were in the winter garden. Camille shook his head negatively. In the movie theaters, went to the scene in the ice town to go sledding. Camille, did your husband lock you out of the house? No. Why just a lot of business from Zenit. The woman tried to defend herself, but it came out insecurely as it is not up to it. I don't feel like it. That's not good. So not far to depression. But it thoughtfully looked forward and suddenly turned sideways, dragged and resolutely behind him. We'll fix that. You see me somewhere. I'll show you one unusual place. You're gonna love it. Actually, it's not open yet, but soon it'll be the best choice for those who miss true romance. They entered the building and found themselves in an empty lobby. John and Camille walked to one of the doors and opened it. The man gestured for his companion to enter, flicking the switch. Camille gasped. They found themselves in a hall reminiscent of those seen in historical movies. This is where they would hold dance parties. So beautiful. Camille ran her fingertips over the tires of the white grand piano on the small stage. Do you like it? Very much. But are we allowed to be here? The woman walked on, listening to the seemingly melodious tapping of her heels. She took off her down jacket and put it on the table. The room was a little hot. Why not? The man approached her with a kind of predatory grace, her heart hammering sweetly with absorbent cotton. Anxious as if to find herself. I'll cross the hive. There are bees in it, and they can fry. But it also has honey. Does it taste of risk? At times, without exacerbating the experience. She didn't notice as he walked by, lightly pressing a button on some equipment, and soft music flowed from the tall speakers. The sounds of the blues floated in the air, and they seemed to push her into John's arms as he gently embraced her around the waist and took her hand and led her in a dance. "You're so beautiful." Camille forgot how to breathe. Every breath felt like a miracle. All she could see were his eyes. "Are you happy?" She couldn't speak. She shook her head, unable to answer precisely and tell a truth she didn't know. "You are the mother of a wonderful child. But are you worthy of the man you've thought of as your husband all these years?" "What do you mean?" "My time is running out. I must go home. Go far away and never come back. But I met you. Can you stay?" "No, but you can come with me. I knew. Stephen, family together forever. Trust, loyalty, affluence, romance, caring." John spoke of what was absolutely, unquestionably important and necessary. For Camille, every word struck her mind with lightning, and she tried it on for herself and this man. Surely, yet gently leading her in a dance to the magic of the blues. She wasn't thinking of Christopher now. She remembered that she had a husband, a father, and a child. But could she ever think of all that in relation to him? Also foolish. A warm flower blossomed in her heart out of anticipation of happiness. Camille smiled, imagining her and her son, John, resting somewhere on the beach under the palm trees, and Stephen calls him Daddy, and they are immensely happy. A real family. "Wouldn't you agree?" John asked. And suddenly his gaze changed to the more abrupt lords. "You agree? We leave together and forever." Perhaps say the last words for a few moments. Later, they would have had the effect he longed for, but something suddenly seemed to bring Camille out of the complacency of a lazy trance. Almost a flight, when dreams and reality are so closely intertwined that one can do anything to realize dreams. "I haven't decided yet," she replied. "John, I'm in the dance too fast, my legs are tired." He squeezed her hand too tightly. "John, look eye to eye, as if not my orders. Look, listen, and obey." John, let go, stopped, and he rekindled the embrace. "This is wrong." Camille slowly pulled away from him, touching the day. It seemed to her that in the man's gaze now, there was not an ounce of love, but something else. Hate is impossible. It's the sun that sends the glare, only. "No need to go. Stephen and the other kids at the playground. It's time for dinner." "Excuse me, I need to think." "No, I'm sorry. I ran out of the dance hall, picking up my down jacket on the run, throwing it on outside." Christopher. It seemed to Camille that nothing she had ever wished for so passionately as for her husband to be at home now and not to be late at work, where something had to be solved urgently, because the schedule of tasks was already being fulfilled somewhat on the wrong track. What was the fault of the suppliers of low-quality materials? So everyone waited for new ones to be ordered. "Camille, what's wrong?" My husband was at home, looking out of the kitchen, looking rather unusual. He was holding a bowl of dough, and we're having apple pie. We wanted to surprise you, didn't we? He smiled. He patted Stephen's temple, who also hurried to show himself to his mother. "Look, what apples, Ma? And where have you been?" "Out for a walk." Camille replied absent-mindedly. "Walking. Looking around. Too bad it's not summer. What's wrong with winter? You can make a snowman and go skiing. Son, go wash the apples for the pie." "And I can." I round my eyes, Stephen, for whom not being close to the sink was the ultimate fun. "You know, I think I overreacted to John. He just came into our family's life so unexpectedly." Sigh. Okay, I admit I was jealous as a fool. You see, here he is too. Yeah, it's not pretty, but I'll make it up to you, I promise." Camille was about to say she didn't blame her husband. And in general, she personally decided that John is completely unnecessary persona for them, even though he saved his son. But then her husband said something that shocked the woman. "Anyway, I had a man-to-man talk with him. We decided that there should be no stupid feud between us. He laughed at what I told him about jealousy. Imagine, he's already got someone else. He said it was secret, an affair, but it'll be out soon. Camille thought Pebbles' heart was fine. Could her strong John have said that? But it's disgusting, despicable. So we decided to cement our friendship. Tomorrow we'll go snowmobiling. We'll go as a company. Everyone who works here decided to get some exercise. Right. But I'm joining in. So did John. No. Why not? You said yourself at the beginning that I could be more polite, and Christopher frowned understandingly. It's just that you have tomorrow off, Camille said hurriedly. The reason her husband should have canceled an outing that she found suspicious. What seemed odd? Wrong. We were supposed to go snowballing as a family, but we can do that after lunch. Christopher waved goodbye. Well, let's go bake a pie, wife. Without your instructions, I'm sure I'll end up with breadcrumbs. Or raw dough. The next morning, Camille hurriedly looked out the window, but the sun was shining, and the horizon was covered with low clouds. The weather was perfect for a walk. She didn't know what else to say to dissuade him. There was no way to talk to John to find out what he wanted to accomplish with all of this, and what he even thought about his rejection. Waved goodbye for now. Stephen, when Christopher and John were on their way to the group of men in the crowd near the semi-darkness already on snowmobiles. After seeing them off, Camille decided that perhaps she was exaggerating. Maybe they'd just talk, figure things out, and everything would be all right. John would just be a friend. Naive. Maybe. But I'm sure there's a place for that kind of thing in life. The weather turned so quickly. Here it was not the natural forces of nature, but someone had deliberately driven the sky above the forest. Where people went, all the insatiable clouds and winds from many kilometers around. The snow just piled up, but also about the wind gusts circled, its blindness confounding the lace. Do not stand. Keep in line, shouted Joe, the most experienced of the group, who lived in Mountain Lake almost all year round at the post of chief of the place guard. Here, the death would get confused and make a move. The way back amidst the blizzard that had broken up was going to take twice as long at least. So everyone obediently moved on Joe for fear of getting lost in the woods. Christopher Snowmobile sat down for the first time. He hadn't handled it badly in good weather. But now it seemed to him that a moralistic and angry horse was thrashing beneath him. He saw in front of him only vague spots of John, who was riding ahead and was thus second from the tail of the chain. Suddenly, the snowmobile motor on Christopher stalled. He yanked everything he could, but nothing helped. I'm not going, screamed a voice drowned in the howling storm. John slowed down and turned around. The man he'd been looking for so long was walking into his arms, tracked him down yesterday morning and offered him a friendship. It was unexpected. And though the man's hatred for whom John had betrayed all these years no longer had power over him, simply could not have power over him, he felt strange, as if he were half a step away from doing something horribly irreparable, and something inside forgotten and muffled by the vestiges of the marshal's suffering. Don't do it. That Camille had refused was unpleasant to him, humiliating to his ego, but did not at all destroy the plans. It just made it more difficult. More time was needed, and this trip could change a lot of things. But right now, John watched a tiny human figure waving in the distance, and a genuine darkness rose in his heart. Once again, chance was doing him good. He did not touch Christopher's snowmobile. Something in it had broken on its own. It doesn't cost anything. Now just pedal and drive off after the others will throw their Christopher has a chance that his snowmobile really broke down. And that's when John felt hot, dizzy. It was as if nature itself had become his ally together. No one's going to get enough of this man just yet, and then it might be too late. The decision had to be made quickly, but something was in the way. John suddenly realized with horror that he felt a sense of pity. Yes, there was a monster in front of him, a monster from long ago. But why was it so vile to imagine that by his treachery the little boy would lose his father? What would Christopher's wife grieve? Breaking free, John turned the snowmobile abruptly and steered it toward the elders. What's wrong? Shouted out in a bore. It won't start. Nodding, John tried to inspect the snowmobile. It's bad. Come on, get on behind me. We have to hurry. The visibility is getting worse. Christopher obeyed without a second thought, but the moment was lost. The companions ahead dissolved into the snowmelt. The road, the stacked string of snowmobiles, was rapidly coming to a standstill. Suddenly, the wind rushed at the forest with great force, and an old pine tree, whose roots had long ago poked out of the ground when its giant crooked paws crumbled with a creak, nearly perished beneath it and nearly struck its branches. Abruptly it stalled. The men realized that moving forward was impossible. There remained an option to try to go around in a wide arc. But the weather, it seemed that fate itself was determined against both the Avenger and his as yet unsuspecting victim. The snowmobile was traveling along the edge of the ravine, along a narrow strip free of bushes. Suddenly, the strip of snow shuddered and dragged it down behind him. The forest swallowed up the two men with a shriek. Waking up, John let his hands around the emptiness, so not the whole group, and only then opened his eyes. Everything was dancing in front of him. He bumped his head a little. In addition, the blizzard had not subsided. Because he froze, he realized that he lay unconscious for a quarter of an hour at least. Christopher called out, looking around, noticing a dark patch of clothing nearby. Rushed to him, turned him on his back, felt for a pulse, the lying man quietly for the country. Where does anything hurt? My leg hurts. Get up, I'll help you. Can't lie down, can't sleep. Raised upright in the bathtub and supported him. John made it to the snowmobile. They were lucky because they threw him off it before he landed, and unlucky in that the transport flew nose first into a huge boulder. One look was enough to know that it wasn't going to go any further. We're going to die, whispered him. No, said John. It was disgusting. Everyone was moving against him. Let me breathe, dream on, let's go. Suddenly John saw something up ahead. Come on. After only a short distance, the men found themselves at a small house. It was put up a long time ago and had no owner. It was for anyone who needed a dry and warm shelter in the woods, and this hut continued to be used sometimes by hunters from neighboring villages and sometimes by tourists. That's why dry firewood, matches, lockers, breadcrumbs, groats, and canned food were found in it. Georgia was shocked by what had happened. Then John hurriedly started a fire. Now, at least they wouldn't be exposed to the cold. When the storm subsided, you could just walk back. And besides, they'll probably be looking for them soon. Thank you. You saved me. You saved my son. Now here I am thanking him. John looked at him carefully and then burst into hysterical laughter as he continued to laugh. The man slammed his fists on the wall several times. Yes, so much so that he was staggering to the rescue. It would have been better if you had died in this forest. Who put me up to dragging you, rescuing you? You? What do I hate about you? He finished with a sharply lowered voice, already vital. At the same time, threateningly, the last phrase sounded that Christopher became very frightened. Why? What did I do to you? A blizzard was beating behind the walls. A tire fire hung in the stove. But now it was no longer cozy and peaceful. There was no sense of security. Why did I save you? You should have gone ahead. You wouldn't have gotten out. What did you do, man? You don't remember. Sure, you just did your job and got paid handsomely for it. And how did that money make you happy? Yes, I see it did. Your kid got married. What was it like for me then? Didn't you think? John didn't come closer, didn't move, and stood opposite, and said Christopher didn't understand what was happening. But he also felt like he was about to see John standing there. I don't know what you mean, John. We can just talk. We can. The man sat down on the floor of the wall and spoke, and what he had said about Givolo, for Christopher had forgotten long ago, as a nightmare seemed to have been born. Giovanni had said that through hypnosis, Christopher should reprogram Albert's personality, rid him of his obsessive, unrealistic ideas. To make him more obedient was not a fad, but a concern for the child. For otherwise, what future? What problems? His what? Christopher at first hesitated, but the day after the meeting in Greece, Giovanni brought his son, and he looked as if into the void, said that he wanted to undergo a hypnosis session himself. Giovanni had coordinated with Christopher many details about what meaning he should lay of the hypnosis session. It was strange and frightening. Christopher had only tried something like this on adult volunteers before, and then sort of casually, not really believing in it. But now there was a child in front of him, a little boy who looked obediently into his eyes, and the pendulum listened to the report and fell asleep. And while he slept, folding his arms across his chest, Christopher would tell him what he must accept in his life. He had 6 or 8 sessions in all, after which Giovanni handed him the money, thanking him warmly. Left the bath Alonia with a light heart, because before the last session Alberto suddenly spoke and told him just a few words. "You're going to break me, and I'll never forgive you for that. My father is lying." "So you're Alberto," whispered Christopher. The hut felt warm. "It's even hotter. Now you want to hear the truth?" With a smirk, asked the man across the hall. Christopher shook his head negatively. He didn't know what to say and was afraid of what he might hear. If you had been more interested in your client, you would have found out that he was really a mob boss, but you didn't want to find out something that might shake your faith that you were doing the right thing. "Do you know how many lives he's taken?" And they called him the Black Demon. He was a scary man. John continued the story. Turns out his mother fell in love with a passionate Italian man, not realizing who he was. She thought he was just a businessman. She just couldn't walk away from him. Giovanni wanted to raise his son to be his copy, but the boy did not accept his cruel world, and moreover, once witnessed how his father punishes his enemies. And then he also learned that his father was a member of a mystical order. Giovanni once took Alberto to a meeting, but what he saw did not make him obedient, but only made him even more horrified. So his father decided to resort to hypnosis. He did not trust local specialists, and so the appearance of Christopher Mann from afar was a stroke of luck, especially since his father and grandfather were major figures in his not-so-successful craft. Alberto wouldn't have gone into hypnosis willingly, but Giovanni knew how to persuade people. He said he'd take the dog away, that the animal would suffer, not his son's obedience. And you know what? He took it away anyway. No, the dangerous one died. He was placed on a remote farm. Dad said pet attachment was a weakness, and I shouldn't have any. When my father was gone, it was fortunate. And it happened, luckily, very soon. I got my dog, and we were together for many days. John told of another thing, that he had given up his father's trade. With great difficulty, he managed to make out what money in his father's business was clean. They were retained by her. But to become himself again, he had to go a long way. In an effort to heal, he began to study the psychology of hypnosis himself. And while he was making progress, it was also getting worse. Do you know how many years I lay in clinics in France and Switzerland? All those brains were powerless. Until one day one of them said I needed to face my past. But I don't think he meant what I chose to do. But I suddenly realized, what do I need and what do you need? I asked him. He was no longer afraid for himself, for his wife and son, and decided that I would find you closer and destroyed from him, destroying everything you hold dear. And it was easy to start. John blatantly revealed his plans to become a family friend, then seduce Camille and force her into a divorce, help take his son, take him far away, and there abandon him alone, leaving Christopher with a broken heart. And that attack on the street was staged so John could appear as a hero. But knowing that your wife, no matter what I do, she loves you. Lucky you. You know, what's worse? I thought I was gonna throw myself at you the second I saw you, but I refrained. And then when I found out, what? Are you happy? I started thinking that if I did all that, how I'd be better than you. You destroyed me on the spot, and you're gonna help me be the same. Meanwhile, the storm had subsided, the wind had dispersed the clouds of snow and disappeared under the sun. For a while, the men were silent. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Christopher said. It was his turn to speak. He said that there was really no bringing back the past, that what had been done had tormented him for years, and no, that money didn't bring happiness. The business went bust, and the car was totaled in an accident. He was young and didn't see the true nature of things. He realized what he'd done, especially acutely when his son was born. He couldn't imagine anyone doing that to his boy. It was a long, hard conversation. People who met long ago now were opening their souls to each other. They had no secrets from each other. John felt that for the first time, he could be so frankly unafraid to show his real self. Christopher, on the other hand, confided in him more than best friends, told him how he had married. First divorce. They didn't see eye to eye. How you met Camille and believed you'd grow old with her. "What are you gonna do now?" I asked Christopher. When the last words of the revelation came out, and they were silent for a while. "Admit defeat. Defeat. But you won," exclaimed Christopher. "How I could not avenge myself. You said yourself a moment ago that there was less hatred in you now that you recognize my family. How did you say it's like a fire dying out in the rain? I'm trying to feed it to keep it alive again, because it's kept me going all this time, because I've decided to stay me, to spite my father and you. But I can't help that. Forgiving myself and not knowing what to do next. To live," Christopher said. Once again, he and John met gazes. The brown eyes, the tired eyes of an older man already hard to not old, and the green eyes of a young man whose reality for the first time in many years was clear from the sea was. "How old are you? It's all ahead of you. You're the one who said you had money. You can go anywhere, get married, start a family. Aren't people like me entitled?" It was a sincere question John wanted an answer to. "I don't have it easy myself, but I think you're the one who most needs to just find people to be there for them. Sure, it won't always be easy, but that's life. Hey, anybody alive?" Suddenly, the cabin rumbled. Did they really find the missing? No sooner had the disturbing news traveled around the sanitariums than Christopher and John returned. Camille ran to the car, feeling the ground beneath her feet. More news that Borgia had thrown up 2 of them, a man from the company that had come to the woods. She spoke to Emily, who got the information from her programmer detective, and informed her sister that John is not who he says he is. Rick turns out he is a broker and businessman who was not born in this town at all, although his mother was from this country. It also turned out that Rick was a strange guy. It felt like he was wandering the world, never staying anywhere. For a long time, Rick knew that John was deliberately gathering information about his sister Emily, about the whole family. Camille hugged her husband tightly. "Christopher, there's something to talk about." She nodded to the real John nearby. "You know, I need to talk to you too," said Christopher. John called out to his wife's dismay. I think it's time to reveal things as they are." Looked carefully at his wife. "And there you decide for yourself, sweetheart, how to treat me." Stephen was sent for a walk in the yard for the duration of the conversation. Camille made tea, but no one would touch it. She couldn't believe that the story was the plot of some thriller about her husband's past. It was scary and unimaginable, but there was still the present, in which Christopher received forgiveness, which could no longer hope for another man. As I wanted to believe, finally threw off the weight of hatred from his soul, let go of the past, and could move on. And Camille also realized that she didn't really love John at all. It was a crush. It was reinforced by some kind of hypnosis. Naturally, the woman was hurt, but in the face of the fact that her husband was saved, it's despicable. "The main thing is that everything is clear. I have to go," said John, rising. "And to where?" Camille asked. "I don't know, somewhere where I can be alone. Australia and India, maybe. I haven't decided yet." "May I?" he asked gently. "You will convey my apologies to Emily. I don't think she'll forgive me, but I will anyway." Camille nodded. She also took a notebook and wrote quickly. "Here's her phone number. She won't change it. I think it brings her luck. John looked surprised at the note, took Christopher, suddenly went out into the yard, and in about 10 minutes returned with Stephen. The boy, to whom his father was quietly explaining something, had a sad look on his face. "Uncle John, you are going away. When will you be back?" John was confused. He didn't dare ask permission to say goodbye to the child he had grown attached to. What he applied to Stephen, his skills, was never out of malice. He just somehow immediately sensed the boy's problems and slowly began to correct them. Saying the right words slowly made him more courageous, getting rid of his reticence and indecisiveness. "I don't know myself for sure, I won't forget." Stroked Stephen on the head when Stephen finally left. Christopher and Camille sat in silence for a long time. The short winter day soon slipped toward sunset. A message came from John that he had left for India, and he was already at the airport. Yes, that's how life had turned out, she sighed. Why did I give him Emily's phone number? What about now that it's all cleared up? I mean, he's not a bad guy. She should stop clubbing. Let her get her own life together. You can't be serious, honey. Who knows? At least I did what I thought I did. Camille was right. When the new day came, a really clear, cloudless, crystal clear, frosty day, in which the snowbirds and Christopher, Camille and Stephen were spread out on the branches around the sanatorium. For the first time in many months, they all felt happy together. It was as if they had turned over a new leaf in their lives. Far away, in hot India, green eyes. The man stood on the balcony and looked out over the jungle. He had a lot to think about. He was truly free for the first time. He also remembered seeing a beagle puppy in a store window nearby. Smiling, John walked resolutely out of the hotel. It was time to get a loyal friend, 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 a loyal friend.
Subscribe and click the bell.
Nancy never knew her mother, but in her heart she loved the woman who had given her life. Every day she looked at her daughter with kind, affectionate eyes with a picture on the wall. Judging by this photo, Mom was very beautiful, leading dark hair to the shoulders, large framed with long eyelashes, eyes, a soft, kind smile. When Nancy was little, she had livened up on her father's lap and asked him to tell her about her mom, who had flown away on a cloud. The man would sigh sadly and say our mom was the most wonderful. It was an axiom that Nancy grew up with in kindergarten and on the street. She told all the kids what her mom was like. The kids reacted differently. And if she's so good, why is she on the cover? Why doesn't she fly to you and bring you candy? The neighbor's Jim tried to hurt the girl's feelings. She does, Nancy answered with her red-booted foot out in front of her and her hand at her side. Mommy brings me candy for my birthday and Christmas and puts it next to my bed or under the tree. It's not Mommy, it's your daddy, Jim said, and you're a writer. You don't have a mom on the cover. Yes, I do. Yes, I do, screamed the girl. She was about to cry. Suddenly, Nick got between them and Jim. Nancy's not lying, he told Jim. Nick was 2 years older than the other kids. They obeyed him unconditionally, submitting to Nick's authority. After all, he was already in first grade. Not hers. Dad himself told how she was a wall. Mom was in the sky. But it's too early for you to know that. Come on, Nancy. The boy took her by the hand and led her away. From that day on, no one dared even argue with the girl, let alone venture to call her names or tease her. At the slightest attempt to offend Nancy in front of the offenders, as a guardian angel appeared Nick. Do not be afraid of anything. I will always protect you now, he said to the girl. And whoever dares molest you will have to deal with my fists. He ostentatiously clenched his palms into a fist and shoved it to Nancy. She realized that Nick wasn't kidding. Even though Nancy didn't know her mom, she always felt that she was somewhere close by and knew that her mom was the best and kindest thing in the world. Her father loved the girl's mother very much. He took her in marriage, a very young girl. Almost immediately, the girl became pregnant. The young family began to wait for the firstborn, but in childbirth, the girl's heart failed and she died. giving her beloved husband, little Nancy, all his love for his wife. Chuck took it out on his daughter. Another man would have drunk himself to death, or he'd have gone after his wife. But Chuck's still with the little girl and never leaves her side. Neighbors were talking, watching a man with a stroller going to the village store for groceries or hanging laundry in the yard. There is no telling how he would have coped if it hadn't been for the girl's grandmother. Chuck's mother came as soon as she could from a neighboring village to lift the little girl. She felt sorry for her son with all her heart, because he was already a young widower, and even with a load in the form of an infant. When the girl was a year old, her mother said that you should get married, son. You don't need a mother on the wall. I understand. The mother answered, man. Sit down on the bench in the yard next to the stroller, in which the daughter was peacefully. Only here I cannot even imagine that another woman will bring up Nancy and suddenly will offend. What if she can't love her as her own? I don't know, but no matter how it's done, a child can't do without a woman's affection. And who will teach her how to manage the household to teach her the wisdom of women? Chuck thought for a while, and then hugged, sitting down next to her neck. You will help, won't you? He asked. I'd love to. But he will not live long. And how will I die? Live to be 100 years old, mother. What's your idea? No matter how much you think about it or not, every man has his own destiny and his own time. When Nancy was 5 years old, her father took her to the neighboring village to visit her grandparents. Everything was a wonder to the girl. The big village was not at all like their village kindergarten, with beautiful and brightly colored multicolored paint. A 2-story brick school and a white stone temple with gilded domes passed the windows. That's the school you'll go to when you're a little older, my father said. They'll teach you to read and write there. You'll learn a lot of interesting things. I already know the letters. My grandmother bought me an alphabet book, and Nick teaches me to read by syllables. But I can't do it. And you're Nick. Look, he's a good kid, my father said. The man liked the boy. He never left his daughter's side. Chuck was happy to let Nancy run around outside if Nick came over. I watch her with a serious look, the boy said, though he was only 7 years old and had just started 1st grade. Grandmother and grandfather couldn't be happy with the dear guests. Gave them a treat on the straw. Didn't let their granddaughter off their knees. And the next day, grandmother dressed Nancy in a beautiful new dress, tied a scarf on her head, and took her to the temple. Grandma, where are we going? Asked on the way to church, the girl asked the Babyushka, come on, he will not wave to you, and put a silver cross around your neck. The old lady answered. And why didn't Nancy understand? So that Heavenly Father will never leave you. Heavenly Father. Does he live with Mommy on a cloud? Yes, the sweet old lady paused for a moment and looked at her granddaughter carefully. He protects us all and your mom and dad, and he will protect you too. And nothing bad will never happen to you. Let's go, baby, or we'll be late. The sacrament of baptism plunged Nancy into a state of calm and peace. A bishop with kind eyes and a beautiful vestment stroked her head and called her God's Nancy. The girl felt something special in those words. A small cross on a string appeared around the girl's neck. But what Nancy liked best of all was her father's gift. In the evening, he called his daughter and showed her the metal circles, silk, on which was depicted a beautiful woman with a baby in her arms. This is the Virgin Mary, said the father of the protector, the intercessor of all children and women. Now look at what's inside. Chuck unfolded the locket and pointed at. Inside was enclosed a small picture of her mom, just like the one that hung on the wall in their house, only it was tiny. It's Mommy, the girl said in fascination. Yes, dear, answered the father and put the locket around Nancy's neck. Take care of her, and may she always be near. The girl nodded, looking into her father's eyes, and he stroked her head and hugged her tightly. Nancy's childhood was a happy one. The first time her father took her to school in the 1st grade. The girl in her beautiful school uniform walked with one hand holding her hand and in the other clutching a bouquet of Sharpies grown in a backyard near the house. She was glad that now, like Nick, she would be sitting at a desk and walking to school with a beautiful backpack behind her back. She'd also be making a lot of new friends. The school was in a neighboring village. Every morning a bus took the children from the village. And after lessons it took them back. Chuck worked as a mechanic and could not take my daughter to school by himself. Worried about it, he even asked his mother to meet and see his granddaughter off the bus. The grandmother lived just in the village where the Nancy school was. For the first week, she met the bus like clockwork every morning, picked Nancy up and took her to class. And at the end of class, she met her at the entrance and got on the bus with the other village kids. But then Chuck's mother became ill and went sick. Nick came to the rescue. "Don't feel bad, Uncle Chuck," he said with a businesslike look to Nancy's father as they walked home from the bus stop together. "I'll keep an eye on her. We're in the same school, so I'll see her every break. I'll be fine and I'll bring her home and make sure her feet are dry. Because yesterday, while I was in class, she got in a puddle with the girls. They pulled a kitten out of the water. So I scooped up my shoes full of water." Chuck patted the boy on the shoulder. "Well, brother, then I hope so," he said, smiling at the boy. A couple more weeks later, Chuck came home a little early. From the doorstep, he heard children's voices hold the knife steady. Nick said, "It doesn't cut that much. I can't do it. Nancy, you can do it." "If you practice more often," the boy said instructively, standing in the doorway. The father watched in amazement as his daughter learned to peel potatoes. On the table were neatly arranged books and notebooks. The children didn't even notice when Chuck walked in. "So, what are you guys doing?" Daddy. "Nick is teaching me how to peel potatoes." Nancy shouted happily, dropping the knife and hugging her father. "Hello, Chuck." Nick, just like an adult, he gave his hand to the man. "Here's cooking dinner. I did my homework, you know. I've cooked up some crayons, practiced, and drew a picture." The boy with a businesslike look showed his father Nancy the work done. "Well done." Chuck smiled. "You're real hard workers." "Do hard workers get candy and candy?" Jumping with impatience, shouted Nancy. Father dumped candy on the table. He went to change. He offered Nick to stay for supper, but the boy refused. Mother still had to help feed the cattle and fetch water. He said, and saying goodbye, left. At dinner, the father said to Nancy Nick, good boy, good boy. You stick with him, he'll teach you business and won't let you get hurt." All school years, Nancy and Nick were inseparable. Seeing them together in the street, the boys would shout bride and groom. Bitterly threatened them with his fist, and Nancy proudly in the back. "Fools," she used to say. Once asked, "Would you not marry us?" Nick stopped, looked at the girl, and said, "Marry when you grow up." Nancy laughed. The cripple had such a serious face, as if he was really going to take her as his wife. She genuinely loved Nick and trusted him. But they were friends, and that was all. "No, you won't," the girl replied. Why didn't Nick realize that? Because we, friends on friends, do not marry. How much do you understand? Nick sighed. In the summer, they often went to the river to fish, burned a fire, and baked potatoes. Lightly salted on top of the missing smoke, it seemed incredibly delicious. While Nancy's father was at work, Nick helped around the house. In the winter, they shoveled snow together. In the yard, they stoked the stove and cooked dinner for Chuck. No one in the village was surprised to see them together. All grown up, childhood friends, Nancy turned into a real beauty with the same dark existing hair and huge eyes with long lashes, like her late mother's. And Nick, who was older than the girl, turned into a real man. Broad-shouldered, tall, strong. When he received the summons to the military enlistment office, Nick was a little confused. He knew that soon he would be drafted into the army. He was only worried about how Nancy would be without him. His father was hardly ever home. Chuck worked hard to provide the best for his daughter. The girl's grandparents had died a year ago. Nick's parents duly arranged a send-off for their son. It's a joke. Their son will be serving somewhere far away for 2 years. We have to give him a proper send-off. They set a big table in the yard, invited neighbors and classmates. The girls helped their mother. The boys carried dishes, pies, and simple treats to the table. Nancy was among them. My father played on the accordion, sitting on the stoop by the fence. And when one of the villagers passed by, he called out to see his son off to clap the paper. The walk was in full swing when a panting man ran into the yard. "Nancy here," he shouted loudly, taking his cap off his head. Then I heard a girl call out, The man hesitated, and then with difficulty holding his breath, said, "Trouble. Nancy, your father is dead." "He is." Nancy rose from the table and sat down on the bench again. The guests were silent without sound. Pro Mood calmed down. He was electrocuted by the transformer, a short circuit, and all at once, there was a murmur among the guests. The news of Chuck's death silenced the guests. A mournful look of bewilderment and incomprehension appeared on their faces. Nick jumped up to Nancy. She sat unblinking. Her hands were as cold as the water in the river pool. Her face was pale, stony. Nancy called softly to him, "Come with me." He lifted the girl from the table, took her to the vegetable garden, sat her down on a bench. Nick knew, and now it was necessary to cry. The boy held Nancy tightly to him, stroked her head and kissed her forehead cheeks gently, trying not to breathe. She sobbed, shuddering silently. And Nick felt his heart bursting with pity for Nancy. They sat hugging each other for a long time. Nancy's head rested on the boy's shoulder, and he held her tightly against him. As if with that embrace, he was ready to protect her from the world, from all evil and trouble, from the worst thing that could happen in her life, Daddy's death. The boy and the girl did not notice his mother lowered down on the bench next to him. "Nick," she handed him a glass of water. "Let him drink. I've put some sedative drops on it," quietly said the woman. Nick handed the glass to Nancy, holding it out to her while she drank. Everyone dispersed. "Let's go inside. Nancy doesn't need to go back to her place tonight. She can't be left alone. Her voice is gone." "What's the grief?" Nick's mother got up and headed for the house. Nancy had been like a daughter to her for a long time. She even sometimes thought that when she returned from the army, Nick would announce that he was going to marry her. She and her father would be overjoyed. Chuck's daughter's a good girl, and Nick is apparently very fond of her. And Nick and Nancy sat on the bench growing lilacs, and at the very dawn the girl climbed the clouds and fell asleep on his shoulder. Nick was afraid to move lest he should disturb her sleep. "How will you be without?" I thought to himself. A few days later, Nancy's father was buried. Nick's mother, Vanessa, and her husband organized the funeral and the wake. The table was set in the house. The workers from the tractor shop where Chuck worked came. Neighbors all who respected the man who died. The speech that Chuck was a great worker and a loyal comrade was given by the supervisor. Taking shot glasses in their hands, the attendees honored the deceased with refreshments, and when the women dispersed, they began to help Nancy clear the table. "Nancy, you'll have a hard time on your own," Jim's mother said. The one whose house was across the fence and who had been bullying the neighbor girl all his childhood. "I'll tell you what, girl, we come on, like us, going through the whole household. We have a big unite. And when you graduate, Jim will marry you. You'll be a strong family, and your father and I will help you. Do you have a vegetable garden? It's so big again. Shame on you." Cindy sharply interrupted her, "Vanessa. The girl lost her father. She's all alone in the world, and you're a farm. Why? You should have seen the kindness on the walls." Jim's mother was angry. "Yours is in the army. Auntie's catching up with her, only who's looking after the girl now. But get out of here before you call your man. I didn't tell the women all about you." She took a rag on the woman, and Vanessa found time to be a crybaby. We'll see, said the mother to Jim, and left the house. Vanessa put her arm around Nancy's shoulders and listened. "No one, daughter." Quietly, she said, "You'll do just fine. Your late mother was my girlfriend, and she ran the whole household by herself. And she married very young, too. God rest her soul." Nancy spent the whole summer tending to the farm and garden. Vanessa helped her to get a survivor's pension, but it was very small. Winter was coming. We had to buy wood to keep the house. Nancy took her purse out of her bag and counted the money. It was all she had left. "Good, at least cucumbers and cabbage are growing in the vegetable garden. The chickens are laying well," the girl thought, and headed for the store. On the door of the village store, she noticed an advertisement for a cleaner. "Hello, Lucy." She addressed the sales clerk, not black bread and flour. "Hello, Nancy. How are you?" "How are you?" "I'm fine. Thank you." The girl put bread and flour in the bag. She was about to leave, but hesitated. The sales girl asked something else. "Lucy, is there an ad on your door? Can I get a job as a cleaner? I'd be good at cleaning, believe me." "I don't know." The girl thoughtfully said the woman. "You're going to school soon. When will you have time?" "I'll manage. You just take it," asked Nancy. "All right, come tomorrow morning. I'll show you everything." "Thank you very much. I won't let you down." Nancy hurried home, and the next day, before the store opened, she was standing at the door. She had to get up earlier than usual to have time to feed the chickens, take the cow out of the gate, and give the piglets food. High on the walls greeted with a wave of the hand and the saleswoman Lucy, seeing Nancy outside the store, waiting already. "Well done, come in." The saleswoman gave the girl a bucket, rags, broom, mop, and detergents, showing the front of work, reminded that it is necessary not only to clean the floor, but also every day to wipe the windows and counters. In the fall and spring, it is still necessary to wash the windows. But that's if you work until fall. "Yes, I am. Where am I supposed to go?" Nancy assured the woman. "Daddy's pension is so small, just enough to eat. I don't know how to buy firewood." "Listen, why don't you start selling eggs and milk? That'll give you some money," Lucy suggested. "Who needs it in the village?" Nancy laughed. "Every yard has its own cattle. It's not that you can't surprise anyone with these goods. Wait, a family came to see me the other day, not on the outskirts. Cottage built for the summer. They come with children," said Lucy. "So they asked from whom they can buy natural products. Not only do they need milk and eggs, they also need vegetables and herbs. And you have a huge vegetable garden. How can you do it all by yourself? You want me to talk to them?" If the Lucys came again, it would be so wonderful. Nancy was glad. No, it wouldn't. Money's really tight. I'll just finish 9th grade and then I'll move to the district center. There I'll study and find a job. And if they come over, I'll talk, Lucy promised. "And now let's get to work quickly. You'll help everything faster. You'll go home and do your own thing." Nancy grabbed a bucket and went to draw the water of her soul. There was hope that she wouldn't have to drop out of school. She was already seriously considering it because there were no funds, no strength, and no support. It was true that Nick wrote letters almost every week. Nancy was delighted when she received them. There was so much warmth in each line, something close and dear to her. In the evenings, she wrote him answers, but the letters were short. Nothing new was happening in the girl's life. Lucy kept her promise. A city family, settled outside the village in a cottage village, began to come to Nancy every other day. They bought eggs, steamed milk, vegetables, and herbs from the girl. They paid money without asking the price. They gave more than Nancy, dared to ask, and never took change. The girl didn't know how to thank the saleswoman. Nancy's buyers also told their neighbors in the cottage community about the girl. And after a couple of weeks, other vacationers at the cottages reached out to her house. Now Nancy could save money for the future, buy fodder for the cattle for the winter, bring firewood, when the tall fell out of the tractor trailer into the yard and formed a whole mountain. The girl looked at this wealth in contemplation. Who was going to chop them? She looked at the axe, took it in her hands, and tried to knock the bales. The point of the axe singed into the wood and did not want to cling to it. All this was seen from the fence by Jim Cindy's mother. "Are you going to chop Nancy for firewood?" she shouted. "Hello, Aunt Cindy. I couldn't chop a pile of wood like that. And the axe is so heavy. Where have you seen women chopping wood?" Laughing, the neighbor asked, "I just called Jim. He'll take care of your evidence in no time." Nancy wanted to refuse. She didn't want to let nasty Jim into the yard, but the woman was already behind the fence. A few minutes later, Jim showed up at the gate. "Mother said you should chop wood." "Thank you, Vasia. Please help me, I'll pay, because I can't pay you myself." "All right," Jim smiled wryly. He took an axe and started chopping wood. Nancy watched until the logs were stacked in a separate pile. The girl threw on a sweater and began to whisk them away in a broom, stacking them neatly on the ladder. Jim sweated in the heat, threw off his shirt, and tossed it on Nancy's bench. "Get some water." Hot loudly asked the boy. "I'll get it right away." The girl headed into the house. She leaned over the water tank as she suddenly felt someone grab her. Nancy jerked, but Jim held her against the wall. "Don't you flinch. I'm not going to hurt you." Jim gave her tobacco-scented breath and reached up to kiss her. But Nancy pulled away and grabbed the knife. "Get out of here, or I won't be responsible for me." She held the point out in front of the guy. What crazy people. Jim spat on the floor and tried for the exit. "You're all alone." "I meant well." Breathing heavily, Nancy sat down on a stool, tears suddenly streaming from her eyes. She hadn't cried once since the day she'd seen the crust off, not even at her father's funeral. Standing at the grave, I couldn't drop tears, but now she cried as if she were a child. As if she was in great pain, as if her whole heart was being torn apart by a pinching pain. And there was no strength to bear that pain. A year later, Nancy graduated from a 9-year-old school. The end of May was very warm. The scent of lilacs and cherry blossoms was in the air. The girl stood at the bus station, waiting for the bus to the village. She was returning home from the city. Nancy had spent the whole day in the regional center to find out the conditions of admission to the technical school, to take the list of necessary documents, and to pass the medical commission. It was still half an hour before the bus. She went to the nearest store, bought ice cream and juice, sat down on a bench. Can heard Nancy's voice and looked up. A young man stood in front of the girl. A sports bag hung over his shoulder. "May I sit down?" he asked again. Yes, of course. Nancy moved a little, making room. People with bags and suitcases were rushing around, leading children by the hand. It was the beginning of the vacation season, and Nancy had a house full of work to do in the vegetable garden. It was time to plant potatoes and other vegetables, so she dug it up. It's just a few beds. There wasn't enough time or energy. Nancy was already thinking about leaving the village and going to the city to live. She asked people how to sell a house, and they just shook their heads. Who needs a house in the country? Now everyone goes on vacation in the South in foreign countries. And it was a pity to part with the house where her parents lived, where her childhood passed. "Did something happen to you?" asked the man suddenly. "No. Why would you say that?" "I thought you looked sad. I was just thinking." A young man with a pleasant appearance looked at Nancy carefully. He had a nice face. His bee was falling slightly on his high forehead, and he kept correcting it. "I see. My name is Kevin. Don't worry about you. I'm not trying to hit on you. I'm just trying to pass the time on the bus. I'm tired of being alone. Waiting around. I don't think so." Nancy answered the girl. "Let me guess. You're a student going home for the vacations." "No, you're not. I'm just about to start college." "Where are you going?" The man asked again. "To the furnace. I live there. Good luck. We're on our way." Kevin was happy. "Are you visiting?" "It's just that I've never seen you in our village." Nancy looked at his face. It was completely unfamiliar. "No, I want to change everything in my life and become a villager. I'm sick of the city, the noise. I want to farm the land, live, work. It's strange. People are leaving the countryside now, and you're going to the village. They've announced the boarding of an intercity bus. Is that ours?" Nancy said and got up from the bench. On the bus, Kevin took the seat next to the girl. All the way he was telling her something, making her laugh, and after half an hour it seemed to her that she had known this interesting guy for a long time. "Nancy, do you know who in the village can rent a house or at least a room?" he asked, and Nancy noticed that Kevin easily switched to you in the conversation. "I don't know," the girl replied. "Don't you have a place to live?" "Yes. It just so happened that I didn't worry about leaving everything behind in the city. We're settled in a new place. Maybe you can tell me who I can turn to in cooking. I do not know exactly who to turn to. But if you're in a desperate situation, I can let you stay with me for a while." "It's true, Kevin. Don't worry, I won't hurt you and I'll pay you well. Money is not superfluous." "I'm not afraid," said Nancy with a smile. "Soon our stop will be here." Nancy really needed the money. She also thought it would be more fun to live in the house with Kevin. At least she'd have someone to talk to. "And here you're all alone all day," Nancy said, letting the guest into the house. She took him to her father's room, which had not changed in a year. "You'll be comfortable here. I'll put the kettle on and bring some clean linen." Kevin looked around at the house. It was clean and spacious. No signs of wealth, but you can see that the girl tried to create coziness. The girl left the cups on the table, put out cookies and candies on a plate. "Now we'll have tea for a snack. And then I'll cook," she said to Kevin. "Will you sit down? Nancy, let's use the first name. Since we're going to live under the same roof now." The boy suggested it. "I don't mind." The girl shrugged. "Good for you." Kevin sipped the flavored tea, took the cookie. "You live alone?" "Yes, my father died a year ago, and my mom is long gone." "I'm sorry, it's okay. I'm getting used to it. It was hard at first. My dad was running the household, and it was hard for me to do it alone. Now everything seems to be fine. I have to go to technical school and go to the city. Will you have to sell the cow for the vegetable garden alive or not?" "Still, I think so. It's hard to do it alone," nodded Kevin. "Will you show me the farm?" "Of course I will," laughed the girl. "What's there to see? It's just like everyone else's. I'm interested." That same day, Kevin started to dig the vegetable garden. Looking out the window, how did he use the shovel? Nancy smiled without noticing. How a man misses the earth. It's obvious he enjoys working, she thought. In the evening, the girl heated the sauna and cooked dinner. She caught herself thinking that she did not feel any awkwardness or discomfort from the fact that a man had appeared in the house, as if he had lived here all the time and then left and came back again. She even thought about selling the house to him, but it was a little scary to be homeless. So Nancy decided to let him live here, and she would come for vacations. At dinner, she told Kevin about her idea, and he was happy to hear about it, assuring her that the house, vegetable garden, and livestock would be fine. 2 weeks later, Nancy applied for technical school, and 2 more weeks later, she found out she was out. She returned home very upset, and barely entering her room, cried with resentment. But why is she so unlucky? Her life is already difficult, but she can't even make her plans come true. Seeing her tears, Kevin sat down beside her. "Why are you so upset? Will you get in next year?" he said, trying to calm her down. "Is that the point of life? Does everyone have to study at a technical school and live in the city? What is the meaning of life for you wiping away tears?" Nancy asked. "In living well, working hard, being proud of your home, your household, your family." "I don't have a family," Nancy said quietly. "And there's nothing to be proud of." Kevin was silent for a minute, and then said, "You know what? Let me help you. You and I will start such a farm that everybody will have one. We will sell meat, milk, eggs, and invest the money in the house or go on vacation. There are so many places in the world that you want to see with your own eyes." Nancy had no other choice. She nodded, not really sure what would change in her life. Essentially, everything would remain the same. Summer with its vegetable gardens and chores, and the long winter with its snowy noses. Nancy and Kevin became friends very quickly. The girl liked cheerful and never dull. And Kevin, who in addition turned out to be also very hands-on and enterprising person. Already in a month, the Nancy farmstead got a fresher look. The barn had a new roof, and in the barn, Kevin replaced the door, which was almost completely warped and falling apart, and built new feeders for the pets. He helped Nancy in the vegetable garden, and he did everything as if he had lived in the village all his life. So Nancy found a fiancé. Neighbor Cindy told the village women, "He's a good lad. I guess I'll be lucky with a girl." The men talked. Nancy only waved them off when they heard such talk. "He's not my fiancé at all." But she noticed more and more often that she liked Kevin. He knew a lot of interesting things, told Nancy about different cities where he had once been. And they were also united by their difficult childhood. Like Nancy, Kevin's mother had died. He was just a baby then, and he didn't even remember her face. "My grandmother told me that my mother was beautiful. One day, some hooligans picked on her in the street. She fought back, tried to run away. They sent her to the afterlife." Kevin Nancy told me sadly. She listened silently, not noticing a tear rolling down her cheek. Pity for the boy, who had been left without a mother's care because of the fault of some scoundrels, tore her heart. For Nancy's birthday, Kevin made a feast. In the morning, looked out into the yard. She saw a lot of balloons, hung them on the fence trees, bushes. In the middle of the yard was a table, and on it a 3-liter jar with a bouquet of flowers. The girl went out, and Kevin, noticing her, made an upset look. "I didn't have time to prepare everything," he said. "What's this?" Nancy asked in surprise. "Are the hair in a braid?" I'm sorry. I saw on the dresser your papers that you collected for admission there. Anyway, I found out it was your birthday, so I thought I'd say happy birthday and throw you a party." "Thank you. No one's ever thrown a birthday party like this," thanked Nancy. "You like it?" "I bought a cake too." "Really? Where'd you get it?" The girl knew they didn't bring cakes to the village store. People here like pies and bake them at home. "Yesterday, I went to the neighboring village and hid it in the barn," Kevin answered. Nancy laughed. She was so happy and pleased that someone had taken care of her earlier. The very first person to wish her a happy birthday was her dad. And then Nick. "Well, are we standing then?" "I'll go and put the kettle on. You go and get your treasure out of the shed. We'll have tea and cake." Nancy, laughing, ran into the house. She was in a wonderful, happy mood. Over tea, they chatted merrily about all sorts of things. And then Kevin suggested, "Let's have a kebab fry in the evening." Nancy was surprised. "Yes, we'll build a fire and cook the meat. Only it should be marinated first, about soaking it well so it's juicy." "I agree, but do it yourself, because I don't know how." The girl supported the idea. While she was busy with the shelf and beds, Kevin built an improvised brazier from bricks found in the yard. Built a fire. Nearby in a pot stood flavorful meats with various herbs and spices. Nancy, with a full bucket of cucumbers and tomatoes, stood in front of Kevin and could not hide her surprise. How he could do everything so quickly. In the evening, they had a real feast. On the table, there was a bowl of salad, roasted meat, tasting the smoke of the fire. Kevin even bought a bottle of wine from the village store for the occasion of a birthday can, so Nancy shrugged her shoulders. She'd never tasted wine. Her father didn't drink, and there was no booze in the house. But Kevin poured 2 glasses anyway. "Said a toast to you, Nancy. Good people are few and far between. You weren't very lucky that I met you at the bus station to wish you a happy birthday." He drank from the glass. She looked at the red liquid uncertainly. "If you don't want to, don't drink it," Kevin smiled. "You can just kill symbolically for the celebration." She knocked back the wine. "It was very sweet, delicious. Bear with it for a little while. And I want to say thank you too." The girl said, "No one was bored with you every day something happens. I, for example, have never tasted such delicious meat." "What's that?" "I'll tell you without false modesty. I have many talents. I'm sure you do." Nancy interrupted him. "And I really want to dance. Let's put on some music. Birthday girl's wishes." Kevin Law went to the house to get an old tape recorder. That night they had fun, they danced, and Nancy felt happy, like she was back in her childhood. She wasn't scared. She wasn't alone in the house. The wine hit her head. Nancy kept laughing and spinning around the yard. She didn't notice the quiet music playing and Kevin putting his arm around her waist and pulling her close to him. "Shall we dance?" he asked, looking into her eyes. "Come on." His hands were very strong. Nancy put her hands on his shoulders, felt Kevin's heart beating, and he gently kissed her cheek. Without knowing why, Nancy felt a rush of warmth in her chest. It felt good. That touch. Kevin had whispered words to her this night that the girl had never heard from anyone else. Most tender, sensual, he'd said. She wished those moments of burning sensation of joy would never end. Waking up in the morning, she didn't find Kevin beside her. Nancy stretched under the covers, then resolutely got up, looked out the window. In the yard, Kevin was dousing everything from a bucket of cold water. Kevin waved her hand at him. "Let's go to breakfast. I'm coming." The girl put the kettle on the stove, took cheese and sausage out of the refrigerator, made sandwiches. Kevin hugged her, kissed her, and caught a slightly confused look. "Let's start a new life with this breakfast," he said. "I want you to be my wife." Nancy was taken aback at such words. She remained silent, looking into his eyes. "You agree?" Kevin ran his hand through her hair, and Nancy felt like a little girl again. "I do." A smile appeared on her face. A month later, Kevin and Nancy quietly signed the marriage at the village registry office. The head of the administration gave them a document, according to which they became husband and wife. In the fall, Nancy realized she was pregnant. "We're going to have a baby," she said. One night at dinner, Kevin, "That's wonderful news." Her husband seemed pleased, but noticing Nancy's confusion, he realized that she herself was not very happy about the news. "Why did he want a child? You seem a little sad to me." "I don't know. I wanted to go back to technical school." Kevin got up from the table, went to the window. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said to Nancy, "Studying isn't the main goal in life. What will a diploma from the technical school give you? Golden mountains, a new, spacious, beautiful house, a car you can drive to the city whenever you want, not to fit the bus schedule. He's not going to give you all that." "What about living without an education, Kevin?" Nancy asked quietly. It's fine," her husband replied, raising his voice. "Building the house, raising children, expanding the farm, minding your own business. Look at that. You and I have everything for this. The land, hands, head, people around us who also want to live well." Nancy was silent, her eyes downcast. She was afraid that Kevin was leading up to the point where she should abort, to get rid of the baby. His words, she took it that way until there was a big, beautiful house, a car, and a huge household. It was too early to have children. The girl was sad. "You know how you and I could turn this thing around? While all your high school friends are away at school, they'll be back. And you're a big farm owner with a bunch of contracts for your mini factory. And the baby?" Nancy interrupted him. "What doesn't the baby understand? Husband, the baby's growing up, pleases mom and dad, who in turn pleases him with new toys, and then a computer, trips. He's happy with anything because they love him and care about him. That's not how I envision a normal family. Kevin and I'm pregnant, and we're having a baby." Pronouncing every word clearly, Nancy said, "Not sometime in the future, but in a few months. So that's great. It'll just make us try to do everything we can to be ready for the baby." "So you're okay with the baby, not angry that I'm pregnant?" Kevin splayed her hands, took his head, exhaled loudly, and then hugged his wife and mouthed, "How silly you are. How can I be angry if you have my blood in your belly? Ninuchka, my baby, my son or daughter." Nancy felt as if a stone had fallen from her soul. She hugged Kevin too, pressed herself against him. The couple began to prepare for the birth of their firstborn. Kevin decided that over the winter he had to renovate the house. That's why he invested all the money from the sale of vegetables, meat, and milk in building materials. "The house is not big enough for the family," he said. "In the spring, we'll have to expand. I think to make additions, and there to place not only a nursery, but also a bathroom, so that everything would be landscaped. I'm tired of running to the bathroom outside. How is it all?" "Just one. I'll hire workers. In the meantime, we'll save up the money." Kevin was determined, and Nancy was glad that the boy was a hard worker, didn't drink, and didn't go out. The winter flew by surprisingly quickly. The future mother spent her evenings knitting and sewing the dowry of her firstborn. He was due in May, and Nancy was very much looking forward to it, and at the same time a little afraid of childbirth. On a warm May afternoon, she went out of the gate, brought out the cow and calf, which were to be led to the pasture by the village shepherd. The weather was fine, with no windy sunshine to lose, and the clear emerald-colored foliage appeared on the trees. Nancy put her face to the sunbeam and closed her eyes. "How nice it is that the baby will be born in the warm season so that we can walk with him outside," she thought. When she opened her eyes, she saw a passerby approaching in the distance. He was wearing a military uniform. The young man was walking towards her house. The closer he got, the more dizzy Nancy became. It was Nick. The guy looked grown-up, mature. The military uniform looked good on him. It fit like it was tailored to his neck, meticulously tailored. Nick stopped 2 meters away from Nancy. He stared at her and couldn't say a word. The young man's gaze was frozen with surprise, incomprehension, and bitterness. Nick could not tear his gaze away from his belly of the girl he had dreamed of meeting for 2 years. And she was standing in front of him pregnant, incredibly more beautiful. Yeah, more desirable. "Hello, Nick. mumbled Nancy and took a few steps towards her childhood friend. "You're back for good." "Yes, I am. It's been 2 years. You didn't look like you were expecting me very much." "How could I not? I used to write you letters, but there haven't been many lately. I can see that now. You didn't have time to send word. You had better things to do." "What are you talking about?" Nancy lowered her eyes. "I got married. I'm about to become a mom." "Congratulations." There was so much pain, disappointment, resentment in his eyes that the girl felt uncomfortable. For 2 years in the army, Nick thought about how he would return to the village and propose to Nancy. He loved her more than life and realized it even more at a distance. At night, he would toss and turn from the soldier's bed. He saw her image, mentally pressed her to him, stroked her dark, loose hair, gazed into her eyes. Thoughts of his youth sustained him in his most difficult moments. Nick's biggest dream was to return home soon. What was it like now to look at the girl he loved pregnant by another man? "Nick, son," came Vanessa's voice. The mother stepped outside the fence and saw her son. "You're back, honey." The woman ran up to Nick and Nancy, hugged her son, pulled him close, kissing his cheeks and barely reaching his face. "Let's go home. What a joy we are." Neighbors were already starting to look out of the windows of the nearest houses. Nick and Nancy couldn't take their eyes off each other. The mother dragged her son to the gate, but he was like a substitute. "Come on, let's go." Nick tugged at him. "Go, mother, and follow." Nick pushed away from himself Vanessa. "In a minute I'll be there." The woman stepped aside a little, but she was in no hurry to go home. She was waiting for this moment and afraid at the same time. Vanessa did not write to Nick about Nancy's marriage and pregnancy. She knew the news would break his heart, so she decided to let him serve in peace. "No need to go," Nick told Nancy. "Glad you're doing well." The boy quickly caught up, hugged his mother, and together with her disappeared behind the fence of the native house. She slowly wandered into the yard, not knowing herself why she was so excited that she couldn't calm down. Her temples were tearing blood. Her lower back heeled sharply, as if she had been working in the vegetable garden all day. Suddenly, the girl felt a sharp pain in her stomach. She stopped, grabbing the trunk of a tree with her hand. Mookie bent down and whispered quietly to Peter. Powers peeked out of the barn where by the board. Seeing his wife passed away in pain, he ran up to her. "What? What happened?" Kevin asked excitedly. "I think it started." "Oh, it hurts so bad." Nancy felt something warm running down her legs. Her water broke. Quietly squat down, breathe deeply. The man put her on the bench. "How can you do that? It's still 2 weeks away." "God, Kevin." Nancy whispered in pain. "So sit down for a minute." I quickly told Kevin and ran to the neighbor's house. I flew into the neighbor's yard. He yelled, "Vanessa, hurry. Where is your husband?" "In the field." "Is the planting season coming up?" Said the woman. "What's wrong?" "Why do you need him?" "Nancy's in labor at the hospital. We have to take her." "Shit, all the men are probably in the field. It'll take the ambulance a while to get here." "What do we do?" "Go to her. I'll be right there." Only now excited Kevin saw next to the neighbor tall guy in an army uniform were the keys to the car mother. The woman ran into the house, brought the keys to the old car. Nick got behind the wheel, shouted open the gate. Pulled up to Nancy's gate, he and opened the back door. Helped Kevin to sit his wife down. "Hurry up," Kevin asked excitedly. "How can I?" "Don't worry. Just don't let it get any worse on a road like this." The car sped at breakneck speed toward the exit of the village. At the hospital, Nancy was quickly laid on a gurney and wheeled down the hall. Kevin and Nick remained in the emergency room. Alone, calming down a bit, Nancy's husband held out his hand to the strange guy. "Thank you, Kevin. So your roommate now," he said. Nick looked at the outstretched hand, then at Kevin. He didn't give his hand for anything. He sat down in the chair. "What's your name then?" Kevin lowered his hand. "Nick." "Thanks, Nick. It's about time you came back. Where would I be looking for a car in the village now?" Out of the door came the nurse who had been the first to run out when Nancy was brought to the hospital. "Oh, and Stray, you guys," she said with a shake of her head. "Barely made it." A little more time and she'd be in labor in your car. Is she okay? Kevin ran up to her. Who knows? They took her straight to the delivery room. She's hanging in there. She's doing great. She's not even screaming. You can hear such screams here sometimes. The nurse grinned. Would you hear how your wives curse you for the pain of suffering in childbirth? They threaten to throw you out of the house and kill you. Even when the baby is born, there's no limit to the happiness. That's what we are, women. It's been about 3 hours. All that time, Kevin and Nick sat in silence. Each was thinking about something else. Finally, the door shouted and the same nurse appeared in the doorway. She gave birth. And you're 9. She said, rejoiced dads. It's a boy, a healthy boy. The son breathed a sigh of relief, Kevin. His face broke into a beatific smile. Nick, man, you heard I had a son, Kevin. He wanted to hug Nick. He was so overcome with emotion. But he pulled him away and just said congratulations. You guys go home, the nurse said. There's nothing to do here now. And tomorrow you'll bring your mother's things. It's obvious you didn't pack anything in a hurry. Go on, go on. Nick went to the car and Kevin followed him. On the road, the young father was talking nonstop, probably because of the stress. That's how I waited for him. How worried that the first son was born and not a girl. A man needs a son to help him. And girls, why are all the moms holding on to their skirts? What good are they? That's right, Nick. Nick shrugged uncertainly, but Kevin didn't even notice it. Sons for me. Oh, what's the need for business? I'm planning on building my own. And I can't do it without help. Nancy and I aren't having 5 more. Why? She's young, I'm strong. And that's the thing we do well in bed. Nick hit the brakes sharply. His passenger nearly hit his head on the windshield. Are you crazy or what? Exclaimed Pashka. You have to be careful, you could get killed. Sorry, Nick said quietly through gritted teeth. I was thinking. Back in the village, Nick stopped at his house. His mother was waiting for him at the gate. She was worried and ran out to meet him like Nancy. We got there in time. My son's son was born. Vanessa, Kevin shared his joy. Thank you, Nick, for the ride. The doctor said I would have been on the road a little bit longer. Well, thank God. Let's go home. Nick, you're hungry from the road. And tired. No, Vanessa. Kevin interrupted her. Nick and I need to have a little celebration. After all, it's my firstborn. You're like Nick, with a little from the newborn, so to speak, about my feet, my son. Nick was and wanted to back out. But Vanessa wouldn't let him say a word. I will give you a drink on an empty stomach. Come into the courtyard, I'll set the table there and wash my feet, or it's true. A new man has been born. Let's go. In the courtyard, under a canopy from the sun, the boys settled down at the table, and Vanessa put before them boiled potatoes, lard, herbs, and broth, and meat snacks, and no luck yet, she said. The woman sat down next to her. She couldn't look at her son. He had matured in 2 years, but that was not what the mother noted as she watched Nick knock back a shot glass. There was something about the look in his eyes that made her uneasy. It was longing, or disappointment, or pain. Kevin poured another round. Come on, Nick, to your son. We'll drink to his health, he said. You know, I couldn't think of a name for him. Now I do. I'm gonna name him Nick after you. How about that, Nick? Nick almost choked when he heard about his neighbor's decision. Kevin didn't even notice his reaction. He kept pouring and pouring into the shot glasses. He went home quite drunk, swaying on his way home. After returning from the hospital, Nancy plunged headlong into motherhood. She couldn't get enough of her son. She felt the happiest in the world. Kevin was busy expanding the house. He had already made the foundation for an annex, which was planned to be larger than the old house. In the annex, the man planned to place a living room for his son's nursery, a bathroom with a warm toilet. A well had already been built on the plot, through which water would be supplied to the house. There would be no need to carry buckets from the column. He endlessly traveled to the district center, bought materials. One day he came back with a new idea. Nancy, we must expand the farm, he said. To his wife at dinner. What for? Don't we have enough? We still have enough, but we don't have anything saved, and we need to save without saving now. Tell me, do you want to take your son to the sea and show him the world? And we need our own car to go to the city. When the time comes, I'll give my son an education. That's right. But how are you going to expand? Asked Nancy, pouring tea for her husband. Tomorrow, I'll go to the village administration. I'll talk about the land lease. I think I'll build a farm. It's not an easy business, sighed Nancy. Money doesn't come easy, Kevin replied, raising his index finger in the air. Remember that, and I'll make it work. Just make sure I have lots of babies. No, not anytime soon. Nancy shook his head. That's not the kind of teaching I'll remember for a long time. And Nick is demanding attention. So wait with the hairs for now. She rose from the table and began to clear the dishes. She and her husband lived peacefully and well. Kevin put all his irrepressible energy into his work. The only thing that bothered Nancy was that he didn't want to reckon with the neighbors. This spring, Kevin bought a motorized plow so he wouldn't have to dig the garden with a shovel. And when neighbors asked to use it, he told them to save up money and then buy a car like that for themselves. He refused to help, and once Nancy asked him to buy a potted flower. She invited him to a store in the district center. She liked the plants very much. But Kevin refused, said that if you spend money on such nonsense, you won't have any money left for the things you need. There was an unpleasant situation with 2 hired laborers who helped my husband to build a log cabin for the annex. Kevin promised to pay them. When the work was done, he took a calculator out on the porch and counted how much food they had eaten. Before cigarettes, did you smoke? He took that money out of his paycheck and paid less than half. Rumors of greed on the true man spread throughout the village. Nancy heard people whispering behind her back more than once, but she tried to ignore it. What did she care? She was glowing with happiness. Motherhood was all about the baby, and her eyes were sad only at the sight of Nick. He did not greet her at all at the end of the street and turned around and went in another direction. Nick avoided contact with Nancy in every way possible. But then one day, they unexpectedly ran into each other outside a store. "Do you like him?" Nick asked. Of course, Nancy smiled, fixing the cap on her son's head. How could one not love such a miracle? And they're about the son, said the boy dryly. Do you love your husband? Nancy hesitated. The question of her childhood friend had taken her by surprise. She had never thought about it. She was fine, calm with Peter. He was a man who didn't drink, worked hard, did everything for home and family. We're a Nick family. I see that you don't love Nick, and suddenly you take her hand and he doesn't love you. He doesn't love anybody, he only thinks about money. Don't Nick. The girl tried to interrupt him. Get away from him. Nancy, Nick asked, I can't live without you. I'll love your son as my own. Never in anything. Stop it. Nancy pulled his hand away. Her cheeks burned like flames. I have to go. She walked briskly down the street, pulling Nick in front of her. Nick looked at her sadly. When he got home, he took out a gym bag from the closet, threw things in it. Mother, where is the passport? He shouted at the dresser. In the drawer, replied Vanessa, entering her son's room. Where are you going? I'm going to the district center. I have an army friend in the police there. He said they'd tear me off there with hands and feet. And there's nothing more for me to do here. It's been 10 years. Kevin was on his way to his dream. He managed to lease a large plot of land behind the village, on which he began to build a farm. And to the surprise of the residents of cooking everything he got where it needed to be. He could bargain and buy material at a favorable price. To whom it is necessary to give on the paw, so that not much nagged before the permit. Further with ease, Kevin obtained various permits and passed inspections of sanitary services, arranged for inspectors' real feasts, satisfied with such a reception inspectors, without looking, signed all the documents. 5 years after the start of construction, the company was already bringing in a good income, and Kevin began to build a small shop for processing meat and milk in the workers, and there was no shortage. People came from all over the county to hire him. Kevin paid little, but the labor market in the countryside was not known for its diversity and high wages. So when workers asked him to raise their wages or pay for overtime, he didn't hesitate to send them away. Who doesn't like it? "You can fuck off," Kevin said. "No place is empty. There will be someone else." Nick went to school just like his mother used to. He went with the other kids to the neighboring village. Even though Kevin had his own car, he didn't want to drive the boy, even though Nancy asked him to. And what else? Kevin's response to his wife's request to take his son to school. Let him take the bus like everybody else. And the rain is fine. Reaches the bus stop, won't open up. Nancy was busy all day long at home, often going to the farm to supervise the work, milkmaids, and fulfill her husband's tasks on her own. Women often complained to her about the poor working conditions, the lack of a canteen, a place to rest. And Nancy only waved her hands and sighed. All conversations with her husband were useless. What resting place? Kevin was indignant. They come here to work, not to rest. It doesn't rain, the wind doesn't blow. They should thank them for that. But sometimes Kevin did make grand gestures. So, at the celebration of May 1, he arranged a festivity on the square brought from the neighboring village of local amateur artists. He set up tables with treats, and children that day were given free candy and gingerbread. Go out, cook, happy holiday to you all. Kevin and concluded the solemn holiday speech. The people applauded approvingly. They reached the tables. The festivities lasted until late in the evening. There was music and dancing. And on Christmas Day, a successful farmer brought to the village a tall artificial fir tree, decorated with LED lights, and next to it put a slide for children. After such events, the villagers praised Kevin. They said thank you. But everything about working on the farm was met with grumblings of discontent again and again. Finally, Nancy decided to be persistent. Kevin, for the last time, allocate space for the restroom and dining room. These are people, not cattle. They shouldn't be. They're eating out of cans, bringing their own food, sitting in the barn. Okay, promised him to get away with the snow. Put it there and set up his canteen. At the end of May, the big house grew up next to the farm. The interior and furnishings. Nancy handled it personally. She literally begged her husband for money for furniture, dishes. And when she said she had to take a job, Kevin the cook couldn't stand it and lost his temper. How many times can you do this? You're gonna take all the money? We're a farm, not a sanatorium, to set up sofas for them. Yeah, I'll feed it to you. Kevin, don't you forget where you started? Nancy reminded him. She was determined to make things right for the workers. You came to my house. You found a roof over your head here, and I never denied you anything. I remember. So, with a reproachful look at her husband, something dissatisfied that I dress you with a needle hairdresser and take you to the city so that the villagers envy you. Or do you want to count every money again? Nancy looked sternly at her husband. I'm telling you, you need a cook. End of story. I'm going to town next week. I have to buy something. Prepare the money for the cook too. And if you don't agree, I'll stand at the stove and feed the workers myself. What a bastard. Kevin said when his wife left. Nick, put the kettle on. I haven't eaten anything since this morning, Nick asked. The bosses are furious, demanding to bring up all the cases that have anything to do with the raid on the department store. Nick took the kettle. It was empty. I'm going to get some water, he said, and left the office. Nick had been in the district police department for 10 years. He had no regrets in the investigation department. His career was going well. He liked solving crimes. At first, of course, had to get into a lot of things. But under Nick, who had been working in the police department for many years, Nick quickly got into the work. He left the village right after he came back from the army. His favorite girl became someone else's wife, and even gave birth to a son. And all the 2 years of service, he dreamed every day about how he and Nancy would get married and have a strong family. Unable to live across the fence with his beloved and her husband, Nick made the decision to leave. Favor in the police served his army buddy, who promised to help settle down. At first, the guy lived at his friend's place. After a few months, he got a service housing, a room in a dormitory. Not a separate apartment, of course. But he's the only one. He doesn't need more. No matter how much his mother called him to visit the village, Nick never went. His mother and father sometimes came, and they brought him meat, jam from berries picked in the forest. various gifts. His father even tried to shove money to his son, saying that in the city there were other things to spend. And where would he and his mother put it? But Nick wouldn't take it. His paycheck was enough. Here, Nick. Nick put a mug of tea in front of his colleague. Why don't we go to the cafeteria? You're hungry. Don't, Nick. Not taking his eyes off the papers, Nick replied, Thanks for the tea. The major was sorting out the documents, putting the photos in different stacks. Nick lingered with curiosity. Looking at one of them, the face seemed familiar to him. Nick, who is that? He asked, pointing his finger at the black and white photo. It's kind of a dodgy one. Never found him. The major waved his hand. I don't understand what this picture is doing in the folder. The case has been closed for years. Be a friend and throw the bucket away. I don't eat it anymore. What did you do? Nick took the picture and went to the trash can. Fraud, theft. And you couldn't catch him, huh? Yeah, he was sneaky. Traces for metal. Some no bloodhound could have picked it up. Nick took his mind off his paperwork, remembering old cases from back in the day. He rented apartments with expensive furnishings, and then he took all the equipment and took off. What was the point? Asked Nick. After all, to rent an apartment you need money. That's the point, and the point paid for a month, and took out the equipment at the price of renting an apartment for several years. Oh, and your memory, Nick. Nick said admiringly. It's a long time ago. Do you remember? But I remember Nick. The major took a drink from his mug and lit a cigarette. When they began to establish connections and search for those who knew him, it turned out that he forced his mother against her will to sign a sale for an apartment. And he put the woman in a homeless shelter. He brought her to the shelter, saying that he had picked her up on the road. He dressed his mother in rags and handed her over to the state to take care of her. That's the kind of son he is. Why didn't she file a report on him? Asked Nick. She was generally some kind of strange, was quiet. Silent, all the shelter workers told how they woke up, what happened to her. Well, he didn't get the information from her, from the nurses. He questioned the woman. And then he gave up. Why? Because Nick, it's a grouse, pure and simple. And the investigator didn't need him at all. God forbid such a son. Nick took another look at the photo and was about to send it to the trash. Suddenly, he changed his mind. He sat down at the table and began to look at the face on the photo. It seemed very familiar to him, as if he had seen this person somewhere before. Suddenly, Nick remembered it was Kevin. It was as if he had been doused with cold water. How could Nancy marry a criminal? Nick called out to Nick Major. Why did your colleague go back to studying documents? And didn't even raise his head that if I know where this man is, I can show you. Come on, Nick. Who cares? The case has been closed for years. No one's gonna reopen it today. You'll never find the victims in those apartments again. Let him think he's lucky. Where can I see this case in the archives? Nick wouldn't stop. I'm sure Nick looked at Nick and plunged back into his work to retrieve what was forgotten in the archives. Nick's case was not difficult. After spending about half an hour in his office, he had fully researched the old history and written out the address of the orphanage. Where else could Kevin's mother live? And even if she wasn't there, maybe one of the employees would remember something. Nick decided that he would go to the orphanage and find out what kind of a dark horse Kevin was. Kevin was looking around the dining room. Nancy had certainly done her best. The long wooden table was set. Beautiful tablecloth clients. On the benches were soft cushions, on the walls hung spurs with different plants. The girl looks like a schoolgirl. Arranged plates on the table, laid out spoons, forks. What do you think? What do you think, Kevin? Nancy asked. At her husband's place, waiting for approval, she liked the cozy atmosphere created by his own hands. Don't you think you were giving him a gift? Like what, for instance? Nancy was as calm as a boa constrictor, watching her husband begin to flare his nostrils, for example. For one thing, why do they have to spend money on a tablecloth? Can't they eat without a tablecloth? Where did you get the flowers? I bought them in town for forks. Why did you waste money? You can eat all the food with spoons, not in a restaurant. It's Pavlik. Tablecloths I bought not one, but 3 at once for the shooting. Flowers create a cozy atmosphere, help to relax and rest. And every normal person eats with forks. You can't eat a cutlet with a spoon. You should not fry cutlets. Pour a bowl of soup. That's enough. Why should they relax? They go to the farm and the workshop to work, not to relax. Stop it. You work with people, not slaves. They're not serfs. Not only do they work for a pittance, but you don't want to create conditions. You're happy to throw money away. Kevin was angry. We're making good money. The production and the farm made a very good profit last month. It's not the Middle Ages, but the age of new technologies, and people want to live and work in human conditions, not in a stable. Not expecting herself, Nancy gave her husband argument after argument and was determined. I want you to get the workers on both shifts. Women have to walk from who knows where at 4 o'clock at 4 o'clock. After the night shift, workers come back in the dark, in the cold, and the rain. It's not normal, Kevin. What else? Why don't they each get a car with a private driver? You hear me? That's it. While Nancy picked up the papers set aside and walked towards the exit. Don't make me share the business. I can legally take over the firm, and you can keep your shop. I don't want to sink money into something that's not profitable. I have other plans. Kevin shouted after her. Nancy just waved at him without even turning around. Yesterday, the women outside the store were discussing her husband's relationship with the secretary. The girl lived in the neighboring village and had taken a job with Kevin in the shop. At work, she noted the lateness of the workers, answered the phone, and most of the time she painted her lips and looked at herself in the mirror. They say Pashkut is sleeping with her, said one of the women. Really? With such a beautiful and smart wife, she splashed her hands. The other woman fell silent when she saw Nancy approaching. But she had already caught the gist of the conversation. She had long suspected that Kevin was walking left and right. He might not even come home for the night, saying he had a lot to do in town and had to stay the night. Nancy learned to live with it, but increasingly realized she had to have a mortgage for the future. So she opened a bank account for her son. After saying hello to the villager, Nancy bought bread and headed home. She was tired enough as it was. She also had to prepare dinner. Kevin came back late. Will you have dinner? Nancy asked. She had already cleared the table, checked her son's homework, and started washing the dishes. Hungry as animals, Kevin said and sat down at the table. Nancy set a plate of pasta in front of him, put it down, chomped on it, moved a bowl of cucumber and tomato salad. Nick and a few other students from school are being sent to a camp on the Black Sea, she said. Sat down at the table. Nancy poured tea for her husband. What's that from? Asked Kevin. He showed good results in all the Olympics during the year. That's why they awarded him a trip. Well done, kid. Only half of the trip has to be paid for by his parents. I have until the end of the week to wire $500 for the trip. Kevin put his fork down on the table, sighed. For Christmas, Nancy had made him buy his son an expensive computer. He'd put up the money, of course. Still, he needed it to study. I can't argue with that, but we can do without the trip to the seaside. Let him stay at home, said the husband to his wife. It's a turbulent time. You shouldn't let him go with just anyone. Are you sorry about the money again? Nancy was indignant. Okay, you're sorry for other people. This is your son, in case you've forgotten. I'm supporting you anyway. But when he saw the look in his wife's eyes, he decided it was better not to. I told Nancy to grow up, earn money, and let him go to the sea or to a foreign resort. Let's close this subject and go to sleep, said Nancy, getting up from the table. She realized that it was pointless to talk to her husband. The better things went on at the farm and in production. The higher his level of greed grew. Lately it had been off the charts. And how was it that before, when Kevin had first come into her life, she hadn't noticed that he'd kill himself for a penny? Brushing her hair in front of the bedroom mirror, Nancy thought about what she and her husband had in common. They hadn't lived as husband and wife for a long time. No trips together, no family holidays. When she was a very young girl, Kevin had seemed to her judiciously, intensely caring. And what they also had in common was the loss of their mothers. Kevin had been raised without a mom, too. Maybe that's why he didn't grow up to be so affectionate. Maybe he just never knew what a mother's love and care was like. A mother's desire to give her child the best of everything. Nick shook in the bus for several hours on the way and hoped very much that it was not in vain that he was going to the orphanage, where Kevin had brought his mother long ago and left her there under the guise of a woman unknown to him. Why had he done that? Nick didn't know, but he really wanted to see the woman. If he was lucky, she would be able to tell Kolya a lot about her son. The orphanage director was surprised to learn what Nick had come for. The case seemed to be closed. "We haven't been bothered by the police for a long time," the woman said, and Nick assured her with an unofficial visit. "I'd just like to see this woman, try to talk to her. It's not forbidden. I can't prevent you. Just remember, lonely people are very vulnerable. Be gentle, of course," Nick promised. "Then go into the courtyard." The woman stood up and went to the window. There she is. Look in the blue sweater. "Hello, are you Kelly?" Nick asked. The woman, picking up the sleepy grass from the flower in her neck. "My name is Nick. I want to talk to you." "Yes, I'm Kelly." The woman scrutinized the young man. "What are you interested in?" Nick looked around and noticed a bench. "Let's sit down," he suggested. They walked to the bench. "I'm interested in your son, Kevin." Nick began. He noticed that the woman had a change in her face, staring at one point in front of her, and seemed to be resolved from everything that was going on around her. "When you hear the name of Nancy's husband, don't worry, he's fine. It's just that he's my neighbor's husband. He's healthy," suddenly asked the woman. Looked into Nick's eyes. "He's fine. Tell me, how did you end up here? Did he bring you here? Why did he leave you in this orphanage? Nick, are you trying to hurt him?" Was Kevin's mother trying to figure out why this man she didn't know was here? "No, I want to open your son's eyes to his wife, because she is my favorite woman," Nick replied, deciding to be honest to the end. "Yes, he's the one who brought me here. Only I don't remember much. First, I signed the papers to sell the apartment, and then I was here when I realized what had happened. The apartment had a new owner. My son was missing. Then the police were looking for him. You said he was married?" "Yes. His wife, Nancy, is the best in the world. Very kind and good. You also have a grandson." The news made Kelly's eyes sparkle. She smiled. "You say quietly," the woman said, "as you'll be able to see him very soon and get to know him yourself. Nick has no grandparents. Your son said you were dead, Nancy orphan. I think Nick will be very happy to have a grandmother." "I'm not a grandmother. I don't have enough money to buy my grandson presents." "It doesn't matter." Nick talked to Kevin's mother for a while and said goodbye, promising that he would be back very soon. He decided that next weekend he would go to the village and tell all the news. Kevin's 35th birthday was approaching. Nancy wondered if her husband would celebrate the birthday, or would he again choose to forget about it. But he, to his wife's surprise, offered to throw a family party himself. "You know, I've got a better idea," Nancy said. "We'll organize a real anniversary with guests, with gifts, invite people from the district administration." "What's wrong with that? You're one of the most successful farmers. They'll be happy to come and congratulate you. We'll set up tents in the field near the shop. We'll set up big tables, invite musicians. Let everyone see that you can not only work, but also celebrate." Nancy knew that Kevin's ego could not withstand such flattery, and he would agree. And so he did. The whole organization of the holiday, of course, she took upon herself. On the appointed day, from the very early morning on the picturesque meadow bustled people. There were about 100 people invited. Nancy watched as the tables were set. "Don't forget to put up name tags so that the guests can see who sits where," she prompted the helpers. Kevin showed up in a beautiful new suit and tie. He looked stately. Having examined the set tables, he said to his wife Nancy, "Why put expensive wine and appetizers on the far end? The laborers will sit there with the milkmaid and the boy. The moonshine will do. Don't trifle, Kevin. Let the people see. You spare nothing for the people. They'll say bad things about you later." The man grimaced, but agreed. Gradually, the distinguished guests arrived. Among them were the partners to whom Kevin supplied cheese, milk, cottage cheese, sour cream, and meat. There were also the heads of the village administration. Everyone seated themselves at the tables, placing large boxes of gifts next to each other. One by one, the guests stood up and made congratulatory speeches. Kevin smiled haughtily. The guests praised him for the fact that from a simple boy who grew up even without a mother, he was able to achieve great success on his own, has his own business, and a strong family. Music was played, punctuated by applause. Toasts and cheers were in full swing. When Nancy took the floor, "Let me say, dear friends, we are very grateful to all of you for your support, for your invaluable labor. Kevin has done well, of course, but without your contribution to the farm and to production, he could not have succeeded. Wouldn't you, darling?" She looked at her husband. He tensed, nodded his head. "That's why Kevin wants to thank you all for your diligence and loyalty. All farm and shop workers will receive a bonus of 1 month's wages on Monday. Hurrah, comrades." Nancy raised her wine glass and looked solemnly around the audience. The guests applauded joyfully. Such news was to their liking. Neither rejoiced nor smiled. Only Kevin, rising from the table. All purple with anger, he said calmly, "It's Nancy's joke. Her joke is so funny. Everything stays the same. You and I still have a year's work to do before the prize." The uncomprehending guests looked at each other in surprise. Kevin turned to his wife. "You don't take much on yourself to bear evil," he said, not even embarrassed to be heard by the people present. "Who are you? You're a woman. It's your job to mop the floors. Or have you forgotten where to mop? All you do is spend money left and right. Do you even know how I got that money?" Kevin was so angry, and Nancy stood looking at him with a calm look. "Knowing, dear," she replied. "How did you get the money you started your business with? Unfortunately for you, I'm not the only one who knows." Nick got out of a nearby car. He opened the back door and held out his hand to the older woman. "Come on, Kelly. Don't be afraid. Meet your dear guests." Nancy said loudly, "This is Kelly. She's the mom of our successful entrepreneur, Farmer Kevin. Years ago, he fraudulently sold her apartment and her mom to a homeless shelter, taking her papers. And then he committed several crimes, ripping off ordinary people who had worked for years to make a fortune from what this man had snatched from their apartments. Kevin was wanted by the police, but he managed to get away. It was largely because of me that I was the one who let him into my home then and later married him. But I didn't know about my ex-husband. According to him, Kelly was killed by some thugs on the street on her way home alone. Poor Kevin was all alone. As a little boy, he didn't remember his mom, or didn't want to. I'm telling it right. Honey, is that how you started your business? Now everybody knows about it. There will be a bonus for good work, believe me. I'm telling you this as the new head of the firm." Kevin was shaking with anger. He was ready to lash out at his wife, silence her forever. And he would have done so if the police officers had not suddenly appeared twisting Kevin's neck. Nick cost a lot of labor to find the victims of a long-forgotten case, and they wrote an application to renew the search for the criminal. Justice had been served.